Good afternoon, everyone. It is 1:30. We'll call to order the regular meeting of the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency Board of Directors. Ask everyone to please rise. And Steve, would you lead us in the pledge?
Hand in your heart, ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Chair West,
Yes.
Director Bennett,
Here.
Director Aranio,
Here.
Director Craven,
Here.
Director Borchert.
Here.
Thank you. Agenda, do we have any alternates out there? Let's see. Oh, I see Andy Waters back there. I saw his hand. I didn't see him. I saw his hand go up. This is the only one I see. All right, thank you. Andy, agenda review, any changes? No changes. All right. Public comments. This is an opportunity for public comments. Anyone wishing to address the board on matters not otherwise on today's agenda, please feel free to step forward and do so. Hearing none, we'll move on to board member comments.
I just have one. The more I reflect on the action that the board took at the last meeting regarding how we're going to treat Canal Creek water, the more concerned I am that it's not the appropriate action. I just wanted to express that to the board. Thank you.
Robert, any? David? No? All right, we'll move on then. There's one item on the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll approve it, but I hope everybody puts all these dates on their calendar, because whenever we have a special meeting, everybody says, oh, I don't have that, and so if we put all of these dates on our calendars, we shouldn't have any problem scheduling the special meetings because they're already scheduled.
We can hope. Is that a motion?
That's a motion.
Is there a second?
Yeah, a few of these I can't guarantee are not conflicts.
Right. None of
But that's why we have alternates.
Right. Yeah. I just want to point that out. Yeah, thank you.
So is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Moving on then to agenda item number 2, a LAFCO special election. I don't think we're going to have a formal presentation on this one, but basically the board is invited to decide whether it wishes to cast a ballot for any one of the two positions, the regular position and the alternates position for LAFCO. The ballot is in the board packet. There are 2 candidates for the regular position, 3 for the alternate position.
Yes, the last time we did this for these positions, we did support Elaine Freeman, if I remember correctly. And she has been there quite a while, and I think she's done a good job.
I will be recommending Russ Baggerly, and then for the alternate, Jack Curtis.
Any other questions or comments from the board before we
Are we
open?
going to take them one at a time or vote on both?
Well, first we're going to hear from the public.
Okay, no, I just was,
I just wanted to make sure people knew I had somebody
Right.
else in mind, and then they can decide when they're voting for the one, they'll know,
okay.
Okay. Any comments from the public? Andy?
Thank you, Chair. Andy Waters, alternative. I appreciate your vote last time. I believe I've done a good job representing GMA and KAGIS on the LAFCO board the last couple of years. It's important to my board at KAGIS that we're represented. We're one of the largest contributors to LAFCO, and it's actually been enjoyable that you guys voted for me last time, put me up on there, and I think we've done some good work from the City of Santa Paula Fire Department to Ventura County Fire and some of the interconnections and projects that we've worked on. So I appreciate your support last time, and I look forward to it again.
Thank you, Andy. Anyone else? All right, so I guess then the question is, with respect to the regular special district member,
I'm happy to have,
I'll nominate
yeah,
Elaine.
her nomination go forward
okay?
and see where it goes.
Any other nominations? All in favor?
Well, when you say any other
With respect to number one? Do we, any
Yeah,
other?
I'm nominating Russ Bagley.
Oh, you were, I'm sorry.
I thought she was just going to make the motion that we support Elaine, and then everybody vote on that, but,
Okay,
okay.
I misunderstood.
Yeah, that's either,
Oh, you're running the meetings.
No, no, I understood him to make the motion to go, but
No.
in any event. So you made a motion then to, to nominate Elaine Friedman. Is there, I guess, is there a second to that?
You don't need a second for a
For a
nomination.
nomination? All right. Any other nominations?
I'll nominate Russ Bagley.
I guess any discussion among the board with respect to those nominations before we move it to a vote? So I guess we need to call for a roll call vote.
Which,
Excuse me?
I'm sorry, on which,
Just on the regular member.
but on which nomination?
Russ Baggerly has been nominated and Elaine Freeman has been nominated, so each board member needs to
Pick somebody.
Okay.
pick somebody.
Chair West,
Elaine Freeman,
Director Bennett,
Russ Bagley.
Director Aranio,
Elaine Freeman.
Director Craven,
Elaine Freeman.
Director Borchard.
Elaine Freeman.
Right, moving on to the alternate member. Any nominations? I think you said,
I nominate Jack Curtis.
any other
I'll
nominations?
name and nominate Andy Waters.
There's only one more name on the ballot. All right, let's move ahead with, if there are no other nominations, let's move forward with the vote then.
Chair West,
Andy Waters,
Director Bennett,
Jack Curtis.
Director Aranio,
Andy Waters.
Director Craven,
Andy Waters.
Director Borchard.
Andy Waters.
okay, I will complete the ballot accordingly. Let's move on then to item number 3, the a Sigma update.
Good afternoon, Chair West, members of the board. For the record, Kim Lowe with Fox Canyon GMA staff. And so we're pleased to have distinguished staff from the State Water Resources Control Board here today to provide an update. Sam Bolin-Bryan is the chief of the Groundwater Management Program, and Nicole Kenzie is senior staff counsel with the Office of Chief Counsel. And Sam and Nicole are going to provide an update to you on the State Water Board's role with Sigma, important considerations concerning federal water users, and we'll also touch on adjudication in Sigma. And at this time, I'm pleased to introduce Sam. Are you?
Members of the board, thanks for having me back again. My name is Sam Bolin-Bryan. I'm with the State Water Resource Control Board. As Kim said, I oversee the State Water Board's role in the implementation of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA. With me today is Nicole Kenzie, and together we're just going to give an update on kind of our activities, provide an overview of our process, touch on a couple of kind of topics that we're seeing come up statewide. It'd also be available for any questions that all of you or the public here may have related to SGMA and our processes. Feel free to interrupt me at any time if you want me to dive deeper on a specific topic. Otherwise, I'm just going to start clicking through. I had this slide last time as well. The kind of cornerstone of SGMA that I want to make sure to emphasize in every presentation is that groundwater management is best accomplished locally. It's sort of a touchstone and a cornerstone for all of us. Something the State Water Board is also fully behind, and we recognize this principle with the quote from the governor. So this local control, or this local management, is going to be done through groundwater sustainability agencies, which all of you are kind of participating in. It's important to point out there are 2 state entities involved as well. DWR, the acronym up there on the slide, is the Department of Water Resources. They're responsible for really laying out the framework for implementation of SGMA. So the basin boundaries, the priorities of basins, things like that. They're also responsible for reviewing groundwater sustainability plans. And I think that's really the distinction to make between them and my agency, the State Water Board. The State Water Board is not involved in reviewing the groundwater sustainability plans. our role is kind of coming in after the department's role. So the overall process for SGMA, as you're aware, is that we form these new groundwater sustainability agencies. Those agencies then work to adopt groundwater sustainability plans. What some folks are saying is kind of new and different from many parts in the state is that there's kind of expectations to implement the plans and kind of periodic check-ins throughout implementation. And so these are kind of referred to as the 5-year check-ins or interim milestones. And then over the course of these five-year check-ins, the local agencies will work towards sustainability. And then in this 20-year timeline that SGMA provides, you'll achieve sustainability. Of course, there's a lot of questions of what that actually means. What is sustainability? And that's another piece that SGMA lays out is prevention of these undesirable results. My sister agency, the Department of Water Resources, is so kind as to make some nice icons to signify each of these undesirable results. The key kind of piece I think the folks sometimes gloss over is there's some qualifiers. It's not just lowering of groundwater levels or seawater intrusion. It's that one of these things has to be happening to a significant and unreasonable degree, and it has to be caused by groundwater conditions occurring throughout the basin. And so what all of y'all are charged with is kind of defining what is significant and unreasonable and laying out through the planning process what sustainability means and kind of where it will be measured and how you'll kind of be achieving that. And something that I think is important to recognize, and all of you are doing a great job at it, is the involvement of the community and stakeholders in that process. The statute kind of uses this term beneficial uses and users, and that term is reiterated in the department's regulations describing the requirements of the plans, is to make sure that everyone is kind of considered.
Hardly ever heard from anybody.
Yeah. It sounds like you have a robust public process, which is great. I think it's an important part of SGMA to make sure that all the different kind of users are considered, and I know they all have different perspectives, and it's a tough job to kind of stitch them together. Puzzle pieces is kind of one analogy, but there's probably many out there for how to work through this. But that really is kind of one of the other cornerstones of writing these plans and the processes you do to work through for defining sustainability and how you're going to get there. And so once you've kind of gone through that, as you're going through now and adopt the plan, the GSP itself has its own kind of process that it has to work its way through. You're in the process of developing it now. It'll move to adoption, and there's some logistics there. The statute lays out like 90 days of comment and things like that. That plan will then get submitted to the Department of Water Resources for review. The statute gives them 2 years to review the plans. I think some they'll move faster than others, and I can't speak for their process, but I know they are going to be looking closely. After their review process, they'll be, based on what they've described in their regulation, they'll be kind of giving the plan one of 3 designations. I believe the terms are adequate, which means it kind of proceed as is, incomplete, and this is where there's kind of minor deficiencies where the local agency will be given up to 180 days to kind of fix things that were overlooked. And then the third class is inadequate, and that's where it kind of goes over to the State Water Board for further consideration. So after that kind of review process, and assuming the plan is adequate, it moves to implementation, and that's where the state's role after that point is these 5-year check-ins, where the Department of Water Resources every 5 years will kind of be doing an evaluation of whether you're following through on the commitments in the plan and if the things are going according to plan with respect to basin conditions. Like, are the actions working? Are you filling data gaps? Stuff like that. Moving into kind of the State Water Board's role, there was this recognition and by the legislature and kind of put into the statute that there needs to be a backup plan. And so that's where the State Water Board is kind of referred to as like the enforcer. Sometimes I put it more nicely, sometimes I put it more firmly, but we're really the backup plan when there's a local failure that we're able to step in and temporarily manage the basin until local agencies are able to kind of take back the reins. So kind of some key points for that. We are meant to be a temporary process. We're not able to step in whenever we feel like it. The statute has clearly defined failure points of what triggers our authorities. So all of the State Water Board's authorities related to SGMA are essentially inactive until there's a failure. And then this third piece is that our process is sort of laid out by timelines or deadlines, and those are the intended to be kind of the motivating factors to reach this for critically overdrafted basins, the 2020 deadline. Our process, just at like the highest level, I swear I don't have too many more circle diagrams. I went overboard this time. But you can trigger intervention. So that just activates our authorities. The next step is that we would hold a hearing at the State Water Board, and it would actually be my board making a decision to designate the basin probationary, so there'd be a hearing. If we move forward from the basin being designated probationary, there's this period of time where the basin will have an opportunity to fix the issues that got the State Water Board involved. And so the statute kind of requires us to lay out X, Y, and Z for how to end probation. And so we're going to make sure there's clear off-ramps to the process, because that's kind of our intent, is to get local management back on track. However, if the issues aren't fixed, then we can move to an interim plan. And that's kind of the last step of the state intervention process that I'll be overseeing, and that's where we'll have new kind of authorities to write our own plan for the basin. Getting a little more into the details, triggering the backstop, as I mentioned, is driven by these deadlines. I think we're all pretty familiar with them now. The one we're really looking at for the next year is 2020 for the critically overdrafted basins, as all of you are as well. Kind of the choices or options for avoiding our process and meeting this deadline is you can have one groundwater sustainability agency that adopts one plan. You can have multiple agencies that adopt one plan. Or in certain basins, they're electing to go with the third option of multiple agencies and multiple plans. And in those cases, they have to have a coordination agreement as well. And so all of those pieces have to be kind of adopted by the deadline in order for the basin to avoid triggering the State Water Board's process. When we do get kind of triggered and we decide to proceed with designating a basin probationary, there's kind of a few key things that happen after the probationary designation. First, as we start collecting the data, we'd need to write our own plan. And so it's really, you can consider it a data collection phase. We'll conduct investigations. We'll also collect pumping data from the individual extractors within a basin. And during this period, while we're collecting data, is, as I mentioned before, kind of the opportunity to fix the issues that got us involved. And so all of the processes of reporting and investigations kind of end if the issues get fixed, and we can just hand back kind of local control. Getting into this reporting, I think that's something I've heard from most stakeholders are most interested in, especially the landowners, is this reporting process. It's done through electronic form, so we have a website set up, and it's fairly basic information to start, just where the well is located, how much volume is on a monthly basis is being extracted from that well, what the water is being used for, where it's being used, and the capacity of the well. And so what that process is going to look like is something like this, where we'll have a map interface on our website, and the user will click on the map to say where their well is, and then they'll click on parcels to show where the water is being used. So kind of how we're thinking about things and designing it is that we're looking at parcels within a basin and figuring out who owns which parcels, which is kind of already available, but then which of those parcels have wells. And so that's kind of one of our underlying pieces of information. We're also trying to make it as easy as possible for those that are required to report, because we definitely do not want the reporting process and the paperwork filing to be a hurdle to compliance. We want to kind of make the data submission as straightforward as possible, because that ultimately, at the end of the day, is just our goal is to get useful data that can be used either by us or given back to locals to manage the basin. Associated with these extraction reports is a fee. The statute requires us to recover our costs, so we can't do it for free. The number to kind of note to start is at $40 an acre foot is where we'll be starting the fee, with a $300 per well kind of base fee. There's a small asterisk on those fees, and the text on the bottom right corner is special studies extra. And so this is kind of our starting point, and if we have to do other investigations or technical studies, kind of hire consultants and things like that, that we're able to kind of add on to those costs and distribute them among the users within the basin. If we kind of make it to this stage in the intervention process, it's important to note that when we move to an interim plan, it's not the same as a groundwater sustainability plan. The statute kind of just lays out some key pieces. We have to have corrective actions. We have to have monitoring to show how those actions are going to work. We have to have a schedule. And then kind of this fourth piece is, how are we going to follow through and make sure that everyone sticks to the plan, the enforcement. This is kind of an endpoint, but the main point here, and I think it's the point that most GSAs are also scratching their head with, is a hard point, is what are the corrective actions to fix things like undesirable results or overdraft. For us, the statute lays out we can do physical solutions or we can do demand reduction, essentially. And so physical solutions are more infrastructure-heavy projects. And sort of why I make the point that our plan may not be the same as a local plan is we just may not have the capacity in certain cases to build new kind of hard infrastructure in a basin. It's not really our purview. It's not to say we'll ignore existing infrastructure if we can just turn something on. Certainly we'll consider it, but it doesn't fit within the framework of an interim temporary state plan to be kind of developing new conveyance, say. And so what we're kind of really more looking at is the other authority that the statute gave us is to just do demand reduction, and that's pumping restrictions. And so I kind of highlight that as the more likely option. It's not the only option, but it's just for us and how our program is intended to be designed by the statute is going to be what we're going to look at. So just as kind of an overview before I hand things over to Nicole to go over some specific topics. Our interventions are triggered. We can't kind of act until there is a trigger. The first step is a hearing to designate the basin probationary, after which we'll collect data we think we'll need, and local agencies will have a chance to kind of fix any of the issues and get rid of us. And then if that doesn't happen, then we move to a temporary management by the state. I'll hand it over to Nicole, and maybe we could do questions at the end.
Thank you, Sam.
This looks self-explanatory. Hi there. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be down here and be able to visit. I just wanted to offer some thoughts on a few specific topics. We're seeing, of course, at the State Board across the basins a couple of different issues that are coming up time and time again. And I'm sure you've heard from a lot of lawyers, but I thought for what it's worth, I can at least comment on what the State Board's view of some of these legal issues are that are genuinely tough and challenging. Starting off, there's this diagram we've already seen to discuss the number of beneficial uses and users that you're dealing with in your basin, so many of which raise their own unique concerns. Of course, the federal agencies, the military specifically, relevant in your basins, and as well as in other basins, tribes and state agencies, which are all to some extent exempt from SGMA provisions. And we've seen that, there we go, yep. It's a complicated intersection of laws. There's the matter of sovereign immunity, the federal supremacy clause, intergovernmental immunities. All of these come together to create really a web that's really difficult to untangle. There's some themes that go throughout in general. It is the case that states may not directly regulate federal agencies, their operations, and their property, absent an explicit waiver of sovereign immunity by Congress. Many of the environmental statutes, the federal environmental statutes, do include those types of waivers. However, few of those extend to water concerns and groundwater. So it's certainly the case in the State Board's practice that we are very limited in our ability to regulate or control under our administrative authority over water rights, the actions of federal entities. That does include fees. We at the State Board are unable to charge fees to the federal agencies in spite of some of them holding very, very significant water rights. We're fortunate enough that we're able to pass through a lot of those fees to the end users, and so some of those fees do get paid. But that's an issue that comes up for us quite frequently. It comes up in adjudication actions. The federal government has a limited waiver of sovereign immunity in adjudications where the adjudication is comprehensive, but in other cases, the federal agencies cannot be joined. So I can appreciate the challenges of that. We run up against it, but I think the law is fairly clear on that issue, absent an express waiver of sovereign immunity. SIGMA itself recognizes that fact. SIGMA has that explicit language talking about, to the extent authorized by law, federal agencies may participate. And that's really a restatement of what the law is already existing, and a discussion about the protection of federal water rights. Again, it's a restatement of what the law is. SIGMA doesn't allow for any infringement of water rights, federal or otherwise. So that's all laid out there. There's the also in SIGMA an explicit recognition that federal agencies and tribes may participate in agreements. I think it was contemplated during the negotiation of SIGMA. I was not there. Many people claim they were there. I was not. But that the federal agencies, especially the Department of Defense, as well as tribal interests, came in and wanted to have a mechanism in place for cooperation in the basin. I realize in this case, the Navy is a relatively small player in your basin. In other basins where the federal entities or the tribes are a larger player, we've seen these cooperative agreements begin to form. The example you've probably heard, of course, of Indian Wells, where the Navy has an ex officio member on their GSA board. We've also been working in the San Luis Rey Basin quite a bit, where the reservation lands consist of about half the basin and a significant amount of water use. And in that case, very fortunately, the tribes and the local agencies have come together. They're working on developing an MOU so that they can have joint management of the basin, recognizing that really their interests lie in the same place. I think we went through most of these. We did. Adjudication. So I'm shifting gears a little bit. I thought I'd talk briefly about adjudication, since Ventura County is distinguished enough to have the two first filings for comprehensive adjudication under the new streamlined Groundwater Adjudication Act. I really see adjudication as a companion to SIGMA. The adjudication process is not a hard stop. It doesn't stop the SIGMA requirements, the SIGMA deadlines. I think we have that here. And in fact, the statute explicitly requires the judge who's managing the case to avoid unreasonable interference with the SIGMA process. So an adjudication may be filed, but all of those processes under SIGMA are going forward, which puts the GSA, as I understand, in a somewhat awkward position of having to make these difficult decisions about pumping restrictions and allocations while an adjudication is proceeding. But that was the contemplation. That's how things are going to proceed on parallel tracks. There's no pause for SIGMA. In fact, to the contrary, there's explicit provisions in the code that authorizes the judge to grant a stay while the groundwater sustainability plan or other technical information are being developed by the GSA. And in fact, in the adjudication that is now filed on the Ventura River, there is a pending motion for stay. Some of the parties to the adjudication have asked the court to stay the process while that GSP is being developed and while there are ongoing technical studies. So in some sense, I think the reverse presumption is that the GSP will go forward and then an adjudication may follow on to that. Really, as you can imagine, the underlying information that would be relevant to both proceedings, right? It's the same body of knowledge. So the idea is that those will both can continue forward in lockstep to some extent. In adjudications, a final judgment can be submitted to DWR. These are other ways in which SIGMA really works in parallel with an adjudication process. The judgment can be submitted to DWR to function as an alternate to a groundwater sustainability plan. There are also measures for a groundwater sustainability plan to be submitted and adopted by the court as essentially a physical solution or stipulated judgment. So there may be some benefits down the road if a sustainability plan is put in place that's effective and that works. And if folks want to have that memorialized in water rights law to create what are the actual underlying water rights in that basin, there's a process laid out in the adjudication statute to do that. I just wanted to emphasize that I think this has some, that's our graphic, that you really end up in the same place because the two processes are going forward. That GSP is going to have to occur likely while the adjudication is pending. I know it's a streamlined statute, but these aren't going to be quick processes in any case. Probably the local GSA, in the meantime, is going to have to be managing groundwater, is probably going to have to be putting allocations in place and actually making those difficult decisions. And hopefully that will lay the groundwork for some kind of stipulated judgment if that adjudication continues to proceed. And at the same time, that state backstop that Sam talked about, that will continue to apply. So if the GSAs are unable to move forward, develop a GSP and unable to manage groundwater while that adjudication is pending, the state can step in and develop an interim plan if that's necessary in the basin. And then last, I wanted to talk, we don't have slides on this issue, but I did want to touch on briefly this question that's come up in many places about whether or not allocations by a GSA need to follow water rights priorities or how closely they ought to follow water rights priorities. And it's my opinion and the opinion of my colleagues at the State Water Board that SGMA explicitly authorizes GSAs to depart in certain ways from water rights priorities, that GSAs have significant flexibility to make allocation decisions as needed to manage groundwater in the basin. And that's based in part on the explicit language in the statute, which directs the State Water Board when developing an interim plan to follow water rights priorities. There's not a similar directive for GSAs. They're not subject to that requirement. In addition, I wanted to comment that, as you probably are familiar with, the law of groundwater is so complicated, especially in basins that are overdrafted where you have prescription as a potential player, that it's almost virtually unknowable to know what the outcome is going to be in any given case. In that case, the courts have recognized the reasonable use doctrine, the doctrine of a physical solution, which in themselves introduces an element of discretion, that reasonable use. So to the extent that a GSA, even if a GSA is attempting to follow water rights priorities, I see that there's a lot of discretionary flexibility to make a decision that's reasonable in light of what is known, because there's so much uncertainty in exactly how these water rights match up. So I realize there are other schools of thought on this issue. It's one that, quite frankly, I hope it's not litigated here. I expect it will be litigated, just to be perfectly forthright and honest on that. I think it's an issue that the State Water Board will probably weigh in on in support of flexibility for GSAs if any litigation occurs. But I did want to raise that and confront it head on, because I'm sure it's an issue that is in your mind. And I'm going to leave it at that. I would imagine you may have questions, and Sam and I will be here during public comment. We're not leaving right away. So if other issues come up and questions come up, we'll be here.
I appreciate you hitting that head on. I just would like to ask you to repeat that. Okay. And that is,
GSAs do not need to follow strict water rights priorities in making allocation decisions.
thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Sam, Nicole, thank you very much. I'm going to open it to the general public. Ask if, ladies and gentlemen, if any of you have any questions.
Good afternoon, Jürgen Gramco, Southland Sod Farm. So the statement is made that groundwater sustainability agencies don't have to strictly adhere to water rights. How does that square with the stated section of the SGMA Act that says it shall not impact on water rights?
I'm going to defer to may I answer?
Please, please.
I-
We're all very anxious.
I would say on that, it's just to clarify, SGMA does not say that the actions of the GSA will not impact water rights. Obviously, any kind of allocation or restrictions on pumping will in some way affect the exercise of a water right. What my understanding of SGMA is that any determinations under SGMA do not affect the underlying water rights. So the underlying water rights are there, but the GSAs are explicitly granted authority to regulate the extraction as an overlay. This may be somewhat beyond, but I often think about it in terms of regulations such as zoning on land use, that kind of thing. It's an overlay. It's a regulation overlay. So SGMA doesn't create water rights. There's no right to pump if you don't have an underlying water right. However, SGMA grants GSAs the authority to restrict the exercise of those rights in certain ways as necessary to achieve sustainable groundwater management.
Your very first statement, though, is it's not accurate to say Could you repeat that again?
It's not accurate to say that Sigma prohibits any impact on water rights. It doesn't affect the nature of the underlying right that's there. Just as zoning doesn't transfer property from one person to another, the property rights stay there. But Sigma, of course, does authorize, and it explicitly authorizes the GSA to impose restrictions on pumping and to impose allocations.
So a property right stays there, which can be litigated in zoning. A water right stays there, but Sigma does not is not required to say, hey, you can't have any impact or any effect on water rights.
Correct. I mean, the two, it's on its surface, an authorization of a restriction on pumping is going to, where the property right is broader, which I should say, in many cases, I think in overdrafted basins, the perception of what a water right is largely, there's no right to pump water in excess of the sustainable yield. So often an exercise of water rights are beyond what the boundaries are. But if it's the case that you're well within your right, Sigma still authorizes GSAs to impose certain restrictions as needed.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Anyone else? All right. This is a, go, Brian?
Brian Bundy. I believe you said that it is possible for a judgment to be submitted to DWR, in which case it could be approved as a GSP. If there's already a GSP in place from a GSA, do you have competing GSPs? How does that get resolved?
I didn't hear the question.
Oh,
I can attempt to rephrase the question, and if I'm wrong, run up. I think the question was, I had made the statement that a GSP can be submitted to the court to be adopted as a judgment. Was that the direction? And then the question is, if that is the case, is there also another GSP that might be in place? What happens if there's competing GSPs? And I think the answer that what we're getting at is that the entity that is authorized to submit a groundwater sustainability plan to the court to be entered as a stipulated judgment would be the GSA itself. So you should not have, in theory, competing groundwater sustainability plans at any time.
any other questions? Well, thank you both very much. It's been very helpful, very informative. I guess I do have one question, and maybe it's if it takes DWR 2 years to get around to approving or passing on a GSP, is the State Water Board out of the mix for that whole time?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, good to know. All right.
But please feel, there's been an additional question related to that of what does the GSA do for those kind of 2 years? I say please proceed with implementing the plan. Don't wait for the department's decision.
We assumed that would be the case until somebody told us otherwise, but thank you very much. I appreciate it, Sam. Nicole, thank you so much. This is a receive and file.
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Let's move on to item number 5.
Thank you. This was very helpful.
Item number 4, the GREAT program.
Good afternoon, Chair West and directors. For the record, my name is Kathleen Rydell. I'm here to present item 4, which is the Groundwater Recovery Enhancement and Treatment Program, also known as the GREAT program. Lost a slide there. Advanced Water Purification Facility Update, and a report on the compliance and effectiveness of Resolution 2013-02. This item will be presented in 2 parts. I will give at first a report, a summary on the compliance and the effectiveness of Resolution 2013-02. It will be followed by an update on the Advanced Water Purification Facility by Tien Ng, Assistant Public Works Director at the City of Oxnard. So going forward with my presentation, I would like to state for the record that sorry for any confusion. In the text of the board letter that is in your agenda packet, it references item 3A, 3B, and such. which actually are labeled in the agenda packet as 4A, 4B. And we have provided a corrected staff report, which has the correct numbers in the text. So going forward with that, Resolution 2013-02 was adopted by the board on June 26, 2013. Associated with that resolution is a recycled water management impact plan, analysis plan, a monitoring plan, and an outline of an annual report. Those are included in your agenda packets as items 4A and 4B. The first phase of the advanced water purification facility, the plan, is phase 1 is 7,000 acre feet per year of recycled water. Of that 7,000 acre feet, 1,800 acre feet per year is designated for city use, and 5,200 acre feet per year is designated for agricultural use outside of the city. Key elements of the resolution were summarized or provided in the June 2013 staff report, which is included in the agenda packet as item 4C for your information. So accrual, the resolution allows for accrual of recycled water pumping allocation. They're allowed, the city of Oxnard is allowed to accrue 1 acre foot of recycled water pumping allocation for every 1 acre foot of decrease in groundwater pumping. And then there is a total up to 5,200 acre feet per year of recycled water pumping allocation that can be accrued by the city for any year. Other conditions stated in the resolution include an annual report of delivered water by for the recycled water users. So that report was provided by the city of Oxnard in January of 2018. Those were the reports for 2016 and 2017, and those are calendar years. Resolution condition number 10, the city and recycled water users are to report groundwater extractions. The city and the recycled water users have filed semi-annual extraction statements for 2016 and 2017. There is to be coordination meetings associated with the resolution. And during those meetings, it is to be discussed any expected limitations on the city's use of recycled water pumping allocation. Meetings were conducted on July 18th, 2017 and on May 2nd, 2018. And the limitations were discussed. And as stated in the reports in the attached, we have been in a drought. The trigger levels that are stated in the resolution, the volume of storage is low such that they were not able to. The limitations are they cannot pump any recycled water pumping allocation during 2016, 17, or 18 based on current conditions. Other conditions, 13 is an annual report assessing conditions that was supplied by United Water Conservation District. Those were provided in March of 2018 and included in the agenda packet. And then condition number 18, recycled water users are to file all the required extraction reports, make payments on fees, charges, and penalties due. The city, or the recycled water users, those include, and I'll have the list here, Pleasant Valley County Water District. They have not completed their filings. Their annual efficiency allocation applications are not complete, but Southland Sod Farms and Ryder Brothers have completed their filings. And so recycled water deliveries began in February of 2016. And then Pleasant Valley received water in 2016 and 17. Southland Sod Farms received water in 2016 and 17. And Ryder Brothers started receiving water in the second half of 2017. So there were initially discrepancies in the volumes of water reported by Southland Sod Farms And that was due to the water quality initially as delivered through the brine line, that repurposed brine line. So the initial water received was of a water quality that wasn't quite acceptable as or expected. So the city and Southwood Sod Farms came to an agreement as to where they're going to start their meter readings and what was going to be counted and not. And so that was the initial water quality issue. And then the other one that we find is the timing of meter readings, where the city reports it has monthly readings, whereas the receivers read their meters at a different time. So we have a slight discrepancy in volumes based on when meters are read. So for 2016-17 calendar years, the total recycled water delivered is 2,592 acre feet. And based on the completed filings, we have accrued the city has accrued 252 acre feet of recycled water pumping allocation. In conclusion, there are issues regarding complete and timely reporting that are in the process of being resolved. And there has been no impact due to pumping of recycled water pumping allocation, as no pumping has occurred due to groundwater conditions in the forebay. So for the second half of this item, I'd like to introduce Tian Ng, Assistant Public Works Director, to provide an update on the Advanced Water Purification Facility. I think they have to bring up your slides.
Oh. Good afternoon, Chair West, directors. This slide here is very similar to last year. Just to quickly recap that our current capacity for the recycled water treatment facility is we can produce 6.25 million gallons per day, and it's expandable to 25 million gallons per day. And our feed water is treated wastewater. Basically is we get the water from the wastewater treatment plant and use it as a feed to generate recycled water. So what do we use the recycled water for? Basically is for crops irrigations, recycled water for in lieu, the city irrigations program, and also commercial or industry within the city. And the last one is the aquifer storage and recovery, what we call the ASR.
Excuse me, how much feed water is available to the plants?
Currently, our wastewater treatment plant can produce about 22 million gallons per day. But in order to produce the recycled water, you typically lose about 20% of them, right? So the infrastructure for the facilities are there, and in order to expand it, if the feeds water is available, we just have to add more process equipment and membranes for treatment. So the piping and the structures are there. So just to get a quick overview of the treatment facility. So we started out with the water coming from the wastewater treatment plant, and it has to go through a microfiltration treatment system, basically just to clean up the organics, refine it as much as we can to avoid fouling for the second treatment. So before we send it for the reverse osmosis treatment, this is the stage this is actually the workhorse of the treatment processes. It's going to remove the mineral viruses and clean enough that the state will approve for groundwater injections. But prior to that, we have to add sulfuric acid to lower the pH, and then a proprietary chemicals threshold inhibitor. All this process here is to make the membrane run longer so that it has the tendency of not fouling all the time. And after the process, we follow the state regulations by injecting hydrogen peroxide and use UV for disinfections. And then after that, at this stage, the water
recycled water pH is very low. It's between 6.2 to 6.4, and we have to recondition the water by doing two processes, decarbonator and adding liquid lime before we send it to our customers. So here's our distribution system, or you call the pipeline system. The purple one, the dark purple, basically those are the pipeline that are completed. And the light purple is the one that we're going to do very soon. And the one in the middle here with an ASR facility, which we're going to go talk a little bit in the following slides here. This is our groundwater storage and recovery program. So first of all, for the crops irrigations, we currently still using the Cayugas salinity management line, and that permit is about to sunset July of next year. But recently, we have met with the regulatory agencies, and they agree to start drafting the extension. We have requested the permit to extend to December 2020 because to build the next phase of the pipeline during the design phase, we met multiple challenges and so forth. So just to give you a quick update here, the number of water that we have delivered using acre feet here, it's a little bit less than 5,000 to date. So for recycled water, this is for the city program. We sent it for our golf course. We have a 36 holes championship golf course. New Indy, which is a paper mill located right next to the treatment plant, and also River Park Development, which is coming soon. We haven't served them yet. We still have some engineering report permitting issues to resolve. So up to date, it's about 2,500 acre feet of recycled water delivered. So the next thing is for our aquifer storage and recovery. Let's talk about the permitting. So we, in a month or so, the city will submit what we call the final draft of the report. There's two reports. One is what we call the AKA Title 22 engineering report. This is telling the state how we process the treatment, how we regulate and report. And the other one, report of waste discharge, is basically requesting the state to open up our current recycled water permit to add this ASR program into our permit. So we're planning to submit by the end of the year. So within 6 months, I think the regional board will pick up and be able to talk about process the permit. So the project, it's located what we call the abandoned old Oxnard High School within Campus Park here. So this is the location of our ASR well, surrounded by first phase 3 monitoring wells. And we have completed the construction of the underground infrastructures, even with the recycled water pipeline coming on site to the facility. And our next phase is to finish the permit. And I think one of the permit requirement is that the city needs to do at least 12 months of demonstration testing, and then we'll be able to complete the program. And that's the update.
Tiana, I got a question for you. Over the past several years, many of us have heard about phase 2 or second skid possibly coming online in order to bring additional new supply into the system as maybe being one of the physical solutions that we could be looking at going forward. What is your understanding as to the timeline, possibilities, or challenges you have in a second skid being bought and paid for and coming online?
The answer is very possible. Currently, staff were focusing on finishing the phase 1. For example, having one ASR well is very important to the city. As you know, it started raining pretty soon. When you call Jürgen, he won't answer the phone because it's raining. So we want to have the flexibility to be able to, during this downtime, be able to put it in the ground, and be able to store it rather than shut down the facility, let the wastewater flow out to the ocean. So that's one goal we have to do. The city is currently just started our business plan. In the business plan itself, we reach out to multiple agencies and then ag community. As we develop it, we want their input. How do they see it so that we can work this as a regional solution? So that, to answer your questions, very possible.
Okay. I'm wondering if you could address a rumor then that's been going around that because of conservation and general decreasing flows into the wastewater treatment plant, that solids loading or ammonia loading has become a challenge for you, and that you may need additional new facilities on the front end before you'll have the water available on the back end to go to a second phase?
For us, we started the discussion with the regulatory agencies as we were preparing this Title 22 report. I think that currently it's not an issue. I think if we expand it to the next phase, even with 10 million gallons per day, I think we'll still be okay. But this is something that not only we're facing, a lot of the coastal wastewater treatment plant are also facing, and we're hoping for some regulatory changes.
Understood. Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Thank you, Jill. Let me open it up to questions from the public. Ladies and gentlemen, any questions for Kathleen or Jan with respect to the GREAT program? All right, this too is a receive and file.
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Let's move on then to item number 5. It's an update on United's projected future diversions.
Good afternoon, Chair West, members of the board, Kim Loeb, Fox Canyon staff again. And so, as you well know, the amount of future diversions on Santa Clara River water by United is one of the most important parameters for sustainable management of groundwater in the Oxnard, Pleasant Valley, and West Las Posas basins, as well as for the new proposed OPV extraction allocation system. And as you've heard in comments, United presently has a more optimistic projection of future deliveries than when United staff last addressed your board some time back. And for these reasons, we invited United to provide your board with an update on United's current projections. And United accepted our invitation on short notice. I'm pleased that they did that. And I'm pleased to introduce John Lindquist, Senior Hydrogeologist with United, will give the presentation.
For advancing the slides, Kim, can I just want to get your advice real quick on pointing and advancing?
Yeah, so that'll advance, that'll go back. If you hold that down for a moment, it will bring a cursor up, but I'll warn you, it's skittish.
Okay. Thank you, Chair West and board. Let's see if I can advance the first slide here. The center one, right?
Yeah. I think it's locked up there.
Wait just a second. While we're...
He's going to bring it up.
Okay. And that's fine. So, and while we're waiting for that to come up, I'd just like to introduce Murray McCakron, our senior hydrologist. That's surface water hydrology, a little different than what I do, hydrogeology. And our assistant general manager, Bob Seamack. And they'll help answer questions that aren't geological in nature if your board or the public has them. Kim already stated the problem statement, so I'll just skip over this slide here to hopefully resolve any confusion. And before I dive into the main part of the presentation, I just wanted to note that DWR thinks that it's important to store as much water in the ground as possible when we have it. And that's what United's been doing. That's going to be a theme that's going to recur throughout my presentation. As we've been doing, that's what we hope to continue doing. But there's a corollary to that rule, and that is that in lieu deliveries of surface water can be just as important because that means less pumping. It has the same impact. Outline of our presentation today. I'll give a brief history of United's diversions of Santa Clara River water in the forebay. I think that's important. Not everybody on the board and the public may understand why we have the pipelines that we do today, why United isn't just recharging water through the forebay, why we're doing several of the different things we're doing since then, since we started our operations. I'll talk about the Freeman diversion, operation, and destination priorities of today. That's a big question. Or the board, reasons for concern the past several years, and then planning for the future, our projected future diversions and pipeline deliveries. And I'm going to start with the history. That's us in the 1930s. And this is us, I think, in 2017 with the new Freeman diversion structure. And all geologists want to start their stories, their presentation, with the formation of the Earth 4 billion years ago. My superiors said, no, start like yesterday. And in geologic time, 1927 is yesterday. We were formed the same year that Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic, but more importantly and relevantly, the Owens Dry Lake had just dried up because of Owens Valley water diversions, and LADWP had built the St. Francis Dam. And so there were concerns about water rights down the Santa Clara River Valley, on the Oxnard Plain, and Pleasant Valley basins. And so United was formed to protect those water rights, to make a claim to the waters for the people of the basin, and to conserve or store water, the conservation part of who we are, Santa Clara Water Conservation District and now United. That meant to store water, really. And we're doing that underground. We started doing it in 1927 underground. So this is us in 1927. 1928, we built our first Satakoy spreading ground. We built spreading grounds in Piru shortly after, and then Santa Paula. So this is all we were doing in those first 20 years, is spreading water at those 3 spreading grounds. And between 1930 and 1950, we were able to divert an average and spread an average of 10,000 acre-feet per year, 9,900. And during our best year, we got 23,000 acre-feet. That would obviously not be enough to help the basin today. And we even recognized it back then. So there were no surface water deliveries via pipeline back then. There was insufficient funding for larger projects. And there were concerns, especially on the Oxnard Plain, about the potential for seawater intrusion, and that was recognized in 1931. Groundwater elevations were below sea level across what they called then a large portion of the Oxnard Plain. That was, let's see, 31, almost 80 years ago. It's funny how we're repeating history. It was the beginning of an extended drought in 1945. When United was formed, it was a 7-year drought. It actually turned into a 20-year drought. It wasn't as intense as our current drought, but it was longer lasting and had some big impacts. The annual overdraft was estimated to be 30,000 acre-feet per year back then, and it was forecasted to get up to 60,000 acre-feet per year with anticipated growth on the Oxnard Plain. So they recognized back then that we were growing, we didn't have enough water. And finally, it was determined that recharge alone in the forebay would not be sufficient to counteract drawdown, especially in Pleasant Valley. That's where the largest amounts of drawdown were occurring at the time, and no matter how much water you put in the forebay, you just couldn't transmit it through the aquifers fast enough to control that drawdown. So that was an issue, and I'll talk about how that was responded to later.
Could I ask you one question while we're on this slide? In 47, when the annual overdraft was 30,000 acre-feet, and the overdraft was forecasted to grow to 60,000 acre-feet with anticipated growth. And do you know what they identified as sort of the overdraft number, and what was the pumping in 47, the total pumping?
I can show you the pumping shortly. It wasn't that different. In the 40s, it was a little less than today. In the 50s, it was pretty much like today's pumping. But the supply was much less because United didn't have the facilities then to put as much artificial recharge in the ground. I'll touch on that in a minute too.
And the overdraft number that they were using, what was the sustainable yield number, I guess, right? Did they?
I'm sorry, I don't know that off the top of my head, but they were probably pumping about 80,000 acre-feet. So I think they thought then that the safe yield was about, I'm approximating in the range of
50.
Probably 40 to 50,000 acre-feet per year.
Thank you.
But that did not include all of the recharge that United has subsequently done.
Thank you.
So surface water was needed to get to Pleasant Valley. And there was consideration of recharge. I just thought this was a funny aside. Recharging city of Oxnard, I think they called it Oxnard City Sewage. Yeah, they did. I've got it on the slide there at the time. They thought maybe we could get 3,000 acre-feet per year into the Satakoy spreading grounds, and that's something that's recurring perhaps in the near future, we'll see. At the time, it was deemed too expensive, and it would add to the TDS problem. So by 1947, with all those issues going on, it was widely recognized that major new water supply projects were needed to avoid that severe overdraft in Pleasant Valley, seawater intrusion, and potential water grabs by other basins. There were other agencies looking to dam Sespe River and export the water to basins outside of our area. So in 1950, really, I say United Water Conservation District was formed. It was really a kind of a transference. Santa Clara Water Conservation District became United. Key support was from the city of Oxnard, and that gave us a lot more financial resources to accommodate the problems. And with that, so we already had the Satakoy spreading grounds, like I showed earlier, and Piru spreading grounds. Santa Paula were out of use by 1950. But we added Santa Felicia Dam in Lake Piru in 1955. That's 100,000 acre-feet of storage, a modest-sized dam, but it really helps us control recharge down in Santa Clara River Valley and add to the recharge, supplement it. And then the El Rio spreading grounds in 1956, at about the same time as the Oxnard-Hueneme pipeline, also 1956. Pleasant Valley Pipeline in 1959, and the PTP much later in 1984. So that was delivering water out to the Oxnard plain. I should step back real quick. I want to talk about PV pipeline. That's the direct surface water connection from basically Satakoy to PV that was seen as the most critical, one of the most critical issues at the time. PE came along later. I'll talk about that. And Freeman Diversion came along much later. I'll talk about that later. This is that 1991 Freeman Diversion. That's the big concrete structure that we see today. A big improvement over our old way of bulldozing berms and stuff right in the Santa Clara River. And so thought everything was good, but the cycle repeated. And in 1979, our guests here, I think, Division of Water Rights, I'm not sure if these guys are from there, but the State Water Board report came out, Oxnard Plain Groundwater Study. Seawater intrusion was once again an issue. And in fact, let's see if I can get this pointer to work. If not, oh, good. You can see that the projections in 1979 were that by year 2000, seawater intrusion was going to come all the way up into the center of Oxnard over here towards Camarillo, almost reaching the 101 freeway. And the State Water Board threatened to adjudicate the basins back then. In response, all of us formed the Fox Canyon GMA to control overdraft, and at the same time, United was given more funding to install projects to improve the water supply to counteract the potential seawater intrusion. And so that's why the Freeman Diversion and PTP were constructed. It was in response largely to that yet again, a seawater intrusion threat. I'm going to talk about the past just a little bit more because this is really getting relevant to the present. And these are extractions, decadal averages. So they're acre-feet per year by decade. So in the 1910s, there was very little, let's see if I can get the pointer to work again. Not sure, oh, there it's way up high. Very little groundwater extractions. But then by the 1920s, agricultural growth was especially occurring on the Oxnard Plain and throughout throughout the area, including the Santa Clara River Valley. And the line shaft turbine pump was invented. So pumping started picking up. And by the 1930s, extractions, these are estimates from the USGS. We don't have reports, but these are estimates. We're around 65,000 acre-feet per year. After the war, after World War II in the 1940s, we kind of topped out on all the irrigable land was pretty much in use on the Oxnard Plain and up the Santa Clara River Valley. So groundwater extractions kind of topped out at 90,000, 95,000 acre-feet per year on a 10-year average during the last several decades. 1980s, a couple of things going on. In fact, I'm not sure exactly. There was the allocation period occurring then for the GMA. That's part of it. Maybe other things were going on. We had a drought also. So now on top of that same graph, I'm going to lay on United Diversions. So this includes our recharge and our surface water deliveries combined in one graph. And I'm sorry, I would have separated them out, but it made the graph really complicated. But the point is, with United's diversions, they were kind of low in the 30s and 40s, but really started picking up in the 50s. We were closing the gap between extraction and recharge. In fact, by the 1990s, you can see the amount we extracted and delivered in lieu of pumping, we almost matched what was extracted. We, meaning the basin, the people that live on the Oxnard Plain and in Santa Clara River valleys. That was a really unusual decade, the 90s. It was the wettest by far during this entire period of record. So this is kind of an outlier, this 1990s spike. This is probably more reflective of what we actually have the capacity to divert today, somewhere around 65,000 acre feet. And the 2010s, even though they're not done yet, we've only got one more year that I would count as part of the 2010s. And unless it rains a whole lot, that number, I'm sorry, didn't mean to, let's see if I can go back. This last bar is probably going to stay about where it is. There we go, in the 2010s. So this has been a horrendously bad year for diversions and artificial recharge. What has that meant over time? So now I'm showing groundwater elevations in this blue line. This is sea level, the red line down the middle. And you can see that as pumping increased in the 30s and 40s, these are average decadal groundwater elevations throughout the upper aquifer system. But the point is, in the upper aquifer system, groundwater elevations started plummeting after World War II during this big spurt of growth on the plain, stabilized. United was able to start recharging more water and delivering some in lieu. And we actually have begun to recover groundwater elevations in the upper aquifer system. Upper aquifer system doesn't look good today, but generally it's above sea level and it's in fairly good shape compared to the lower aquifer system, which started dropping in the 20s and 30s and 40s and then really plummeted in the 50s. It's stabilized by the 1960s, rose a little in the 2000s. Really, the only reason this is probably stabilized is we've got the Pacific Ocean right there supplying enough water to keep it stable. But luckily, the lower aquifer system has much lower hydraulic conductivity. It means that water moves through it less quickly. So we don't see nearly as much seawater intrusion in the lower aquifer system as we do in the upper aquifer system. But as various folks have pointed out, groundwater elevations in the lower aquifer system are now 100 feet or more below sea level across most of the Oxnard Plain, especially in Pleasant Valley where they approach 180 feet below sea level. So there is a gradient, a hydraulic gradient that's going to draw in seawater. There's no denying that.
Could you go back one, please?
Yes, sir.
Or back two, even if it doesn't.
Two?
You talked about United Diversions grew a lot in the 1990s, and you said it was a really wet time.
Yes.
Right. And so if it was a really wet time, why didn't groundwater extractions drop some? Because, we talk about when it rains a lot and we have a lot of surface water and all that stuff, that we would be resting our aquifer. But it doesn't look like we had, significant changes in our groundwater extractions.
If you look on a year-by-year basis, you can definitely see that during wet years, agricultural withdrawals or extractions that are reported to United decline fairly significantly. I mean, it's very noticeable. It can be 5,000 acre feet or even more during a wet year. I'm not sure why the decadal average didn't improve that much, but we came off a really high pumping rates in the 1980s. Part of that may have been switching to more water-intensive crops back then. And so I don't think these I hope I didn't just advance the slide. Good. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot going on between the 1980s and 90s, so I can't explain why the decadal averages look the way they do.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Okay, so now the meat, maybe, finally, of the discussion, and that is how do we operate today, and then I'll move on to how we anticipate operating in the future. And I'll be talking in the next couple slides about the El Rio spreading grounds, there we go, Satakoy spreading grounds, PTP area, and the Pleasant Valley pipeline area. These are the 4 potential destinations for diversions from Freeman diversion. And I just want to touch on what our mission is today. United is here to monitor and maintain the health of the aquifers in our service area. However, we don't have the authority to control pumping by others. All we really do is build projects tied to supply water. As I mentioned, the Fox Canyon GMA was given the authority in the 80s to take over the pumping part of the equation, scaling back pumping. United spreading operations provide more than half of the groundwater pumped by users in the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley basins. And that recharge also benefits the Mound and the West Las Posas groundwater conditions. And finally, I don't want to leave out, it's less relevant to the Fox Canyon GMA, but it's important that the operation of Lake Piru and Santa Felicia Dam really do optimize recharge in the Fillmore, Piru, Santa Paula basins and wildlife habitat in the Santa Clara River. So looking back again, I'm going to go back through history a little bit, but this is more relevant to what I think we've been interested in, the surface water diversions. Let's see if I get the point to work. So the blue lines show our forebay spreading, recharge, that we've done over the years, all the way back since the 1930s. And again, you can see they really picked up in the 70s. The dark green here is when we constructed, in the 1950s, the Pleasant Valley Pipeline. Got off to a slow start, but then we got our legs under us, and you can see that I'll talk about averages in a minute, but during most years, we delivered about the same amount down the PV pipeline, except during extreme droughts, like we've had in 1990 and more recently. You can see that, look, in these years in the late 70s, we didn't have much water, there wasn't much diversion, but we still cranked out water to PV pipeline. We just scaled back how much we recharged. And that's been true in the early 2000s too. Now the lighter green, let's see if this will go. Well, the lighter green bars, that's PTP pipeline, which got started really in we constructed it in 1984, really got going in 1988. And so you can see those are pretty stable rates also, despite dramatic changes in total diversions or recharge. Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to advance the slide. I might need help again. Oh, hey, there's a pointer. That's a good sign. Oh, good. Okay. So there we go. Pleasant Valley Pipeline average. Since the time it was constructed, 8,600 acre-feet per year. PTP average since 1988 when it was constructed, 4,900 acre-feet per year. Combined surface water deliveries since Freeman diversion, because that's when things kind of changed significantly on the river. So if you add those two up, since 1991, we've averaged about 15,000 acre-feet per year. One more advance, please. Hold it. Ah, there we go. I just have to press it really hard. I'm going to go bang it on the table. Since Freeman diversion was constructed in 1991, just to give a summary of the totals, our diversions have been 1.7 million acre-feet total. That's a few years' worth of water for the plain. It's 64,000 acre-feet per year is what we've diverted. 49,000 acre-feet per year goes to recharge, and about 15,000 acre-feet per year on average has gone to surface water deliveries. Can you try, Keely? Thank you. But then the current drought hit. So in 2014, we passed our Resolution 01. It was our first formal prioritization of diversions from the Santa Clara River. And priority A is to recharge at El Rio as needed when we're in a drought to dilute nitrates. And that's a health and safety issue. That water goes down the OH pipeline. We want to keep nitrates at a minimum. Nitrates come from past practices out there. We're not sure where. But when water levels are low in the forebay, we have to put more water in El Rio to dilute those nitrates. Second priority was meeting the PV pipeline minimum contractual allotment, which was 12.22%, I believe, of total diversions. Third priority, recharge at El Rio and Satacoy to fight seawater intrusion. Fourth priority, sending water down the PTP system. And the last priority was if we had excess water to send it down PV pipeline. But we've always had some flexibility, and even since the 2014 resolution, we exercise some flexibility so that we can optimize these competing objectives and opportunities. And that's what we'll continue to do. So that was a drought resolution. May not be how we operate in the future. And really, the only thing I think of significance that moved to the top of the list was the recharge at El Rio to dilute nitrates. Okay, maybe Keely, can you advance for me? Hopefully my next few slides are a little simpler. Don't choke the system. Good, good. So now I'll talk about reasons for concern for the past several years, and they focus primarily on endangered species, and specifically on the Southern California distinct population segment of the steelhead trout. Next slide. Good. So I'll summarize this, and this is really the root of the seeming contradictions you've heard from United. In 1991, Freeman Diversion was constructed with a Department of Fish and Game, at the time, now it's Department of Fish and Wildlife, approved fish ladder. In 1997, a few years later, the southern steelhead trout DPS was listed as endangered. And United now needed a take permit in order to operate our dam. In 2000, United started altering operations. In fact, we tried several times to alter them to everyone's satisfaction, to improve fish passage. In 2008, the National Marine Fisheries Service published a biological opinion, or BO, I'll talk about that, it'll come back up a couple times, focused solely on what's best for steelhead trout in the Santa Clara River. In 2014, NMFS stated that the BO is just a starting point. The fish may need more water than that. So at this point, you can imagine folks at United and on the plane were starting to get nervous about our capacity or ability to divert water. Neither of ours is working now? Canceling each other out? Well, one of them worked. Good. Endangered species concerns continued. In 2016, there were a couple of significant threats to our operations. And the first was the Department of Justice Office of Legal Enforcement required United to operate under a new, more strict interpretation of the BO. And Wishtoyo sued us and proposed a no-take scenario for a steelhead trout. And fortunately, in 2018, the court decided that there was no change required in our current interim operations, which were already in compliance with the BO. But they were dark days. That's about when that's probably the period when you heard some member of my staff, I hope it wasn't me that made that presentation a year ago, and maybe Director Ranio and others, were very concerned about what the future held. Maybe you could try. Oh, got it. Good. In 2018, we submitted our multiple species, or an administrative draft of the multiple species habitat conservation plan. It's a pretty stout plan. It's a good plan, we think, for evaluating, well, for how we're going to proceed in the future, operating our dams and keeping the fish passage at acceptable levels, allowing the steelhead to thrive in the river, thrive in the river. So we're evaluating new fish passage designs. We're currently working on a permit to meet NMFS requirements. And all of this is based on the best available science rather than some unsupported suppositions that folks have been making over the last few years. So we're moving forward using, like I said, best available science. So what does that mean for the future? That's just a pretty graphic. Let's see if I can get the slide to advance again. Oh, yeah, that's it. And this is my second to last slide, finally. I just wanted to mention, so these are the diversion scenarios that we put into our habitat conservation plan. And if I get the pointer to work again, good. So this is what we've actually done since construction of Freeman Diversion through 2015 in terms of water. So the purple bars at the bottom are how much we sent down the PV pipeline, about 9,000 acre-feet per year on average. PTP, again, it's been about 5,000 or 6,000 acre-feet. And then 26,000 acre-feet per year each to El Rio and to Satacoy. So that's the averages since 1991. The BO would have required us to operate this way. Less diversions to the tune of 15,000 acre-feet. And I should also say, I'm going to step back one, sorry. This was, again, a very wet period. So this is more than we would normally expect under actual long-term climate conditions. This is more than we'd expect. So we would have expected some cutback anyways. Under the BO, we would have had a huge cutback of about 12,000 or so acre-feet per year. Most of that would have come out of recharge at Satacoy, but there would have been some hit to pipeline deliveries. So instead of delivering about 12,000 or so, 14,000 acre-feet, we would be delivering 12,000 if we had to operate under the BO. We proposed this new normal operation. One more, there we go, good. So what we hope to do in the near future, since we've got the HCP done, we have to commit to building a new fish passage, and we're working on that. I hope to get back up to a new normal operation. So there'd be some minor modifications. This is our existing structure, more or less without modification, but modifications to how we operate to improve fish passage, and also that commitment to build a new fish passage. And we would hope to be putting back out 62,000 acre feet per year or so, assuming 1985 through 2015 climate conditions, I should say. And I'll talk about the uncertainties in a minute. But that gets us back up to 14,000 acre feet per year pipeline deliveries. We hope to expand Freeman diversion in the near future, partly in response to climate change, partly just in response to opportunities to take more of the highest flows that are kind of muddy in the river, not good for fish. We do that more or less with, well, this would be the first phase of expansion, no change in our water rights. Then we get up a little higher, closer to 67,000 acre feet. It doesn't really change our forecasted surface water deliveries. We'll keep those the same. What we get to do is recharge more water under those conditions. And finally, by 2036, we hope to get a new water right and continue expanding Freeman diversion. And then we'd be actually at a higher diversion rate, higher recharge rate. It doesn't really change surface water deliveries, but by 2036, that is our plan for diversions and deliveries. Now, I want to bring up these uncertainties off to the right. There is uncertainty, certainly, about future rainfall, both year to year and long-term climate change. Groundwater sustainability plans, what you develop, especially for the Oxnard Plain, may affect how much water we deliver to each of those different potential destinations, Saticoy, El Rio, PVP, PTP. Obviously, if the forebay groundwater elevations remain low under whatever plan you adopt, because of pumping, you allow pumping or shift pumping some other place, then we might have to put more water into El Rio, which might make less water available to surface water delivery. So there are potential uncertainties in exactly what these numbers fall into. And then implementation of new projects could affect, potentially in a negative way. I see more likely that the new projects you're contemplating and that United is contemplating would most likely mean a fuller forebay, meaning potential for more surface water deliveries. And I'd like to just touch on two of those. We're actually looking or reaching beyond what we're talking here. We're in the process of evaluating an ASAP project. It's our ASAP project, and I forget what the acronym means, but it's basically a pipeline from Lake Piru directly to the forebay, to the Freeman diversion. And that could potentially mean even more surface water deliveries than we've historically taken on the Oxnard Plain. That would mean we'd have to expand pipelines and deliver surface water south of current PTP area, the current PVP area. The benefits would be it would increase sustainable yield on the basin. It would mean improved water quality. Instead of groundwater, those folks would be getting surface water. So that's an option. We're just in the starting phases. I hope we don't get a bunch of angry calls. Why are you planning this? We're just looking at what might be possible in the future at this point. And then our brackish water project could form a barrier to seawater intrusion and supply a dry year steady source of water to the plain that could help conditions in the forebay. Could mean more surface water deliveries, could mean more long-term options for how we deliver the water. And finally, there's a potential for more imports, which United is working on. And see, I have one more slide. I wanted to talk about, let's see, how do I get this thing going? Do you know how to do it, or does your AV guy have to do it? I just want to talk about one more. Can't do it? Well, that's a fire department helicopter. We may not be able to get this video to go, but, oh, you almost got it, didn't you? Yeah, and if you click that play button on the left. One modern role, no, you just went to the end of the slide. One modern role United has had that we haven't traditionally had is to deliver, or is to provide a source of water for firefighting. And that was, oh, there we go. That's a great video that one of our folks took. This is our desilting basin and the CDF helicopter coming in to pick up water to put out the Briggs fire just a couple miles away earlier this year. But we supplied water during all of the recent fires, allowing super scoop planes to land on Lake Piru and the sort. So this is one of our more recent activities that we're pretty proud of. So that's the end of my presentation.
So could you go back to the second to the last slide, the one that had the
I think I
El Rio diversions, the Satakoy diversion? Yeah, that slide right there. That slide's good enough, right? So basically, when there have been cutbacks, what allows the Santa Clara River diversions, surface water diversions, stay pretty stable is because we've been allowing the cutbacks to come out of El Rio or all Satakoy.
Right, mostly Satakoy.
Okay, so we simply are not recharging those two basins and instead continuing to do our surface water diversion.
Yes, because that's where the most value is for the water. If you can push that, so if you can deliver water out to Pleasant Valley or to the southern part of the Oxnard Plain or central part of the Oxnard Plain, that actually increases the sustainable yield overall of the basin because you're having less overdraft near the ocean where the impacts are greatest.
Okay. The part of our rationale for saying we're going to give people credit for their Santa Clara River water, et cetera, is the fact that we're saying that water would have been pumped out of the basin anyway, right? So we'd say, hey, we were going to pump that out, so if they take it by surface water. But if in fact what we're doing is we're not allowing that water to be recharged into El Rio and all of Satakoy, we're actually not pumping it. That water's not going into recharge. So if we have 60,000 acre feet and I'm going to use hypothetical, we had 20,000 being diverted from surface water. And now for some reason we're down to 30,000 acre feet. And we say, well, we're still going to divert the surface water at 20,000, right? We're not recharging 10,000, right? We're just sending this off, that 20,000. If instead that we cut it at a proportional rate, if we went from 60 to 30, you would take that 20,000 down to 10,000 in terms of surface water, and you would have taken the rest and recharged the aquifer. So we're doing it at the expense of our ability to recharge the aquifer, correct?
Correct, although it's being done in lieu of pumping closer to the ocean. So in theory, every drop of water we deliver as surface water is not being pumped. And that actually has not a one-to-one benefit, but about a 1.1 to 1 benefit.
Because of the location, you're saying.
Sustainable yield.
Well, I'm having trouble getting my head around that necessarily, but I understand the 1.1 completely in terms of location, but I'm not sure that it is. I'm not sure that they would definitely pump all of that even when we had that water. But I really appreciate this. I have a much better appreciation for why you have a 14,000 acre foot suggested average withdrawal. So it's much more understandable how you came up with that.
Okay, but I do want to clarify, there's uncertainties still remaining in the numbers.
No, you guaranteed 14,000.
No, I would say that under some climate scenarios, we're going to be delivering less than 14 as surface water.
I do understand.
Okay, good. We'll also be, good, I just want to bring up this pointer. We'll also be diverting less. So the ratio should stay about the same under any scenario. And I don't know if that matters in regard to your question.
It does matter to me if the ratio is going to stay the same.
I would imagine that your 5-year and 10-year, 15-year updates, your board will have to reevaluate whether we've maintained those ratios and whether we're really doing the right thing at every update. There is going to be opportunities with these new projects for optimization to save costs, help the environment, improve our water supply at every step. So it's going to take work.
I appreciate the frankness and the directness and the real sense of transparency. It gives me more confidence in the numbers. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Welcome.
Thank you, John. You're not done yet. No, go
Okay.
Any other questions from the board? Let me open for, Dave?
I just want to say my appreciation for hearing engineering and talk of projects and action solve problems. I think that's really positive. Appreciate that. That thought that United, even in the face of these difficulties, continues to try and figure out the win-win. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Sometimes I get the impression that the board or maybe the public thinks we're some gigantic agency like Metropolitan Water District, some outsiders. United is about 56 employees, engineers, scientists, a lot of operators, just turning valves, trying to get things done, trying to plan for the future. And we operate on a relatively modest budget at $25 million a year. And we really do represent the people of the plain. It's not us, it's not United that owns the water or that has gotten these projects going. It's the people of the Oxnard Plain, it's the people of Piru, Fillmore, Santa Paula Basins, Mound Basin that have made all this possible. United is just the caretakers.
Thank you, John. This, the estimates of surface water deliveries that we were working into the allocation systems have been a source of a lot of concern, a little more than a little irritation, and a lot of real worry about how much guesswork was going into this, and actually this has helped clarify that a lot. Gives us a little more confidence that we can count on the water that you guys are now guaranteeing, right, Steve?
Yeah, I would say that some of us really appreciate that you guys are starting, I think, at, what was it, 10,000 acre feet, or a modest amount. It's going to take a few years to dig our way out of the hole we're in now, so don't trust my optimism. I'm always way too optimistic. But this is a realistic proposal. Your 10,000 acre feet per year starting point seems realistic to us.
Thank you, John. Any questions or comments from the public?
John,
Yes.
Peter Quinlan with Dudek working on the GSPs. John, is 15,000 acre feet per year the maximum capacity of the existing pipelines to convey water down to the plain on the PV pipeline and PTP?
No, I think looking back at the records, I don't know the capacity, and I don't know that I have somebody here today that knows that offhand. I think there have been years when we've put 18,000 acre feet down, and of course that's not occurring year round. So I would assume the capacity is significantly higher than that.
Am I right in assuming that the capacity has to be higher than 15,000 if we're going to average 14,000 when we have maybe the first 5 years at 2,000?
Yeah, absolutely. So take a typical year where we delivered 18,000 acre feet. That's probably only occurred during half the year, or maybe more. But yeah, so I don't know the capacity offhand, but I'd imagine it's well north of 20,000.
So you, from an engineering standpoint, have taken that into consideration, the capacity of the pipeline, when you said your 14,000 average, knowing that we're starting low, you still think we can get to a 14,000 average?
Oh yeah, because we've been delivering 15 to 18 in the past, and so it's basically less of the same because we had the super wet 90s where we were delivering more. We had more water than we have traditionally.
Thank you.
The capacity of the pipeline is not an issue. It's getting the water into the pipeline that's the issue. Okay. As John said, we don't serve surface water 24/7. It's only when it's available. So if we can, so the 14, 15, 18,000 is based when the water is available. So without knowing, talking to the engineering staff, I would think that it could be at least 30 or 40,000 acre feet if the water was available.
Martin Gramco, Southland Sod. John, do you happen to know what the native yield of the basin is?
There have been several.
Native yield.
There have been several past, I've looked at past reports, there have been several past estimates that said no more than 65,000 acre feet per year.
It's lower than that, though.
That was considered the maximum. I don't think anybody's done anything quite like a sustainable yield analysis, and I don't recall anybody saying a native yield analysis, but it's more likely, the past estimates have been less than 65,000 acre feet, typically in the 60,000 acre feet per year range. That's Oxnard and Pleasant Valley combined.
All right, so don't go anywhere, because I need you. So I'm not trying to put anybody on the spot, but I'm looking at 65, I'm looking at 65,000 acre feet of, with the new norm, 63,000 acre feet of water diverted every year. And if we improve, there's 67,000 acre feet roughly, and if we get increased diversion rights, 72,000 acre feet. This is all water that's going to get delivered either through the basin or through pipeline. And if there's native yield that's added to that of 60,000, we've got a lot of water, but it can't quite be that. Or it's your diverted water plus your native water should be something close to the sustainable yield. We got to get the basin back. There's a certain amount of water that we're going to have to use to push back salt water and get the water quality up. But once we get it back in balance, from the 100,000 foot view, I look at a water balance, a real simple water balance that says we're putting 67,000 acre feet in. We got native yield of another 30,000 acre feet. That's 97,000 acre feet. Right now, our proposed plan starts at 105,000 acre feet. That's not a big 20-year cutback, right?
Okay, so I misunderstood. I probably didn't answer your question very well. So native yield, the numbers I was talking about, past estimates of sustainable yield, safe yield, they were based on United's recharge up to that point were included. So you're right, native, I hope I didn't imply that I was talking about native yield. I don't know of any native yield estimates offhand. I suspect they're much, much less than 60,000. A challenge that we keep facing when we talk to folks, though, about sustainable yield is it's not quite the same as, how do I put it, a bank account analogy. There's more into sustainable yield under Sigma because you have to consider impacts, and particularly of seawater intrusion. So if you have a well near the coast, we could have recharge, natural and artificial recharge of 70 or 100,000 acre feet per year going on. If we have a series of wells near the coast, it's not going to matter, the balance isn't going to matter because those wells are going to draw in seawater no matter what. So that's why there's a lot of options for how you achieve sustainability, and it can affect the sustainable yield. That's just one example. Or if you're pumping too hard in one area and you cause a lot of drawdown, you can have subsidence in an area, and that would be an impact that would mean the basin's unsustainable while you still may be pumping less than the total yield of the basin. So I would just caution, I agree with you that the native yield plus artificial recharge should be close to sustainable yield, but they're not exactly the same thing. It's kind of like comparing apples to pears.
Right. So what you're describing is the engineering of the system. So the system, if it's not optimal, if we're not pumping in the right places, we're not going to be able to get all the water back out that we put in because of the salt water on the coastlines and so forth. And that's what we need to be looking at is in the terms of the GMA is how do we create a system of pumping and deliveries to maximize all of the water, be it diversions from the Santa Clara River, either through the pipeline or into the basin, where we pump and so forth. So that's kind of that next level down, John, where I was trying to get to yet. What I was trying to get to was that 100,000 foot water balance concept, that what is the best possible situation without bringing new water in, considering those our old school, this is what we do. We bring water off the Santa Clara. We move where we pump. We deliver via pipelines. These are all things we've been doing for 30 years. Are we really looking at a 20-year reduction of 30 and 40%, or are we really not that far off?
And a question I would have with that is, how much does the diversion affect the native, the recharge? In other words, before you had any diversion, if the sustainable yield was, as you call native recharge, was 60,000, if when you decide you're going to divert 60,000 or 70,000, does that affect that natural recharge of the river? So that'd be another factor in there to
Yeah, they're engineers, I'm sure, have got that sorted out. You probably have looked at that as well. There's a certain amount of water that's coming into the basin you know, isn't it 20,000? Isn't that the number? 20,000? In the model?
I
wanna
don't
say
recall
it is,
offhand.
yeah.
I'm sorry, there have been so many numbers going through my head lately. I don't, I don't recall. You may be right. Sorry.
All right, so that's all. You understand where I was coming from. I'm just trying to understand, you know, I just wanted to take a big picture look at it again and say, gosh, maybe when I see that, I add a little native yield in, I start thinking about moving pumping around and go, oh, maybe maybe the sky isn't falling.
And I'd like to respond to your question and also mention one other thing. So we do lose a little bit of groundwater during wet periods to the ocean. So some of the native yield goes into the shallow aquifer system and it goes out to the ocean. And sometimes it goes into the upper aquifers. So some of the native yield gets lost. But Martin's point is well taken. At United, we're very optimistic about our future, and we think we can make this happen. Regarding your question, Director Bennett, about what happens if we weren't diverting. Right now, on average, there's about 208,000 acre-feet per year of water that flows down the Santa Clara River. We're only diverting 65,000 acre-feet. So if we weren't diverting that, it would just mean more water going down the river for the most part. So it doesn't have a big impact on native yield of the basin, right? Because the water that's going past already, the 100 and whatever it is, 40,000, 150,000 on average, some of that would infiltrate anyway.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, this too is a receive and file.
So moved.
And second, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, let's move on then to item number 6, a GSP update.
Chair West, members of the board, for the record, Kim Loeb again, GMA staff. Want to thank United and John for putting that presentation together. I think and the discussion, I think, really sets up the next discussion that will be brought to you by Dudek on the results of the modeling to date and the GSP update. And I think to the comments that John made and Director Borchard about projects, you know, in the future, once we get our initial GSP done, we have to use projects that are at a certain maturity and ready to go. There's a lot of conceptual projects that are still in the feasibility stage, but I think that's going to be one of the big next focuses post-GSP, as we've discussed, is really looking at these regional projects and regional management for how we're going to move forward to sustainable groundwater management in the 20-year period. With that said, as I reported at the last meeting on November 20th, that for many reasons, including the significant complexity of the effort, the numeric groundwater modeling of future scenarios for the GSPs took a little longer to set up and initiate than anticipated when the current schedule was approved by our board back in June. That said, I'm pleased to report that both United and Cayugas have really prioritized the effort, and a lot of ground has been made up in recent past. There's good momentum, and we'll know better at the January meeting the impact of the schedule, but this time it looks to be on the order of a month that we will need to maybe look at adjusting the schedule. But we'll come back to you in January to let you know where we're at, because by then the modeling will be pretty much completed. I also should mention that because our December meeting is early in the month, we're a little bit out of order in the way we would normally present to you, in that the TAG meeting is tomorrow. So your board is getting an update on modeling that we've not taken to the TAG yet, so they'll get an update on that. Dudek did make all the modeling files and data available to the TAG on Monday, so I want to point out that scheduling issue here, but they will get the full report tomorrow. So at this point, I'd like to invite Dr. Joe Weinberger of Dudek to give you the presentation. Thanks.
Thanks, Kim. I'm going to adjust these down as always. So I was here 2 weeks ago now, I think, giving an update on the groundwater modeling as well as where we are in development of the GSP with respect to developing the sustainable management criteria. And I'm back, and I'm happy to report that we have made quite a bit of progress actually in just those 2 weeks. The modeling is really coming along quite quickly, and we're still in the middle of developing scenarios and analyzing the output, but you're going to see what we've got to date. And with that, I'm just going to leap into the actual presentation. Starting in this case with actually an example to sort of set the discussion up for looking at specifics in both East Las Posas and then across the Oxnard Plain, Pleasant Valley, and West Las Posas management area in those basins. And where we are in the SGMA process is actually in the heart of it at this point. The objective of the GSP is to establish the set of conditions under which the basins can be managed sustainably. And the first part of that is to establish, well, what's your ideal condition for management of the basin? And that is quantified under the measurable objective. So that's the quantitative goal that's reflective of the desired conditions in the basin. And if we look at an example, theoretical well projected into the future, starting in 2020, moving to 2070, we've got a 20-year implementation horizon to get above our lower level, the minimum threshold, and then we want to manage the basin during the remaining 30 years towards that measurable objective. Now, there's no penalty from DWR or from any state agency for not maintaining the measurable objective at all times. In fact, the measurable objective is there to give you the operational flexibility to use groundwater during a drought period. What you can't do eventually is drop below the minimum threshold, which is the condition at which it's been locally determined that there are significant and unreasonable impacts to the basin. So your measurable objective is that goal. It's the quantitative goal. I can't bring up the pointer at this point, but it's that quantitative upper goal. I think I've done this a lot in the past, made this gesture. I have it on the graph, right? So the measurable objective is the upper goal. The minimum threshold is that threshold at which if you drop below it, you would start to see significant and unreasonable results. Oh, thank you. And the idea is to give you the operational flexibility to use water within that range. So we're going to start by applying this concept in East Las Posas because the last time I was here, the model runs had already progressed a little bit farther than they had in Oxnard, and so we're going to continue with that. But then in the second half of the presentation, I'm going to show you what has happened with Oxnard, where we are, and get into proposing some of these measurable objectives and minimum thresholds for the Oxnard Basin as well. So just as a reminder, Callegas and their consultant have been really putting in a tremendous amount of effort. We the DUDEC staff, using the regulations from SGMA, have been guiding the effort and providing them with the scenarios to run. And they've actually run 4 scenarios for us. The first is the future baseline condition. That is the condition in which we've adopted 2015 to 2017 pumping rates, static throughout the entire pumping period, throughout the entire 50-year period. But we've incorporated climate change and changes in stream flow projections from DWR. So that is data that DWR provided and has gone through TAG and has been incorporated into the model. So that's the future baseline. The second scenario was to look at the future baseline with those same changes, with the same pumping, but incorporate projects. And these are the projects that went through the operations committee and through the board to be analyzed as part of the GSP, although again, I will emphasize they are not required to be implemented in the future should they be found not to be ideal.
Can I ask a quick question? So in your second bullet point, when you say future baseline plus, does future baseline also incorporate the impacts of climate change?
Yeah, so all of these scenarios are that future baseline with the climate change.
So from now on, when it says future baseline, it means future baseline incorporating climate change.
Correct, yeah. And even, although just because I didn't want the slide to get too wordy, you could say future baseline plus reduced production
Okay.
plus projects.
That's helpful, thank you.
In those last two bullets as well. So, yeah, once we establish the future baseline, that with the climate change, that's the condition for all of the rest of these to be run. So those last two bullets do then incorporate reduced production. In the second to last one, we said we took the future baseline, we've got reduced production, and we've got projects. What do water levels look like under that scenario? And in the last one, eliminating the projects and looking at what additional reduction would look like to get back in the vicinity of what the projects would have gotten us. And this will be easier to see when I actually show you on a slide, which is coming up after this one. This one is just a little bit more detail on the projects themselves and why I said that they were focused on the arroyo. In the future baseline that we've been talking about, that incorporated a decreased discharge from the Simi Valley wastewater treatment plant. And as a result of that decreased discharge to the arroyo, you have decreased recharge to the basin, and if you kept pumping steady, you saw increased declines in water levels in that future baseline scenario. So the projects are looking at how to maintain recharge along the arroyo and keep recharge going in the basin. And so the projects that were incorporated were one, Arundo removal, and that was incorporated both through a reduction in the transpiration, a reduction in how much water the plants were taking out near the arroyo, as well as an increase in surface water inflow into the model domain because the Arundo removal actually extended out of the model domain. So you would see increased inflow into the model as surface water. The second project was looking at a purchase of about 4,700 acre feet per year of the wastewater effluent from the Simi Valley plant to maintain that flow in the arroyo and maintain recharge to the basin. So let's take a look at what impacts these had. And you're going to see here these measurable objectives, if I can find the pointer, although I might have to switch to Kim's laser pointer. There we go. So the measurable objectives are the MOs and the minimum thresholds are the MTs. Thank you, Keely. And then in addition to that, we've got, for context, the historical measured water levels in this well. So this well is well 10G1. I apologize that the arroyo is hard to see, but it is this light blue line along here. This well is screened in the Fox Canyon aquifer, and the Fox Canyon in this area gets recharge from the arroyo. And it's impacted, actually, as shown in the historical water levels, as wastewater treatment plant discharges made it into the basin. We saw a recovery in the water levels, rise in the water levels in this well, and then they've declined since 1990. In this case, now moving into the future, we've got the darker blue line here. That's that future baseline. So that's where we would see a decrease in recharge because of decrease of discharge to the creek. The purple line here is a 25, that's that last scenario. It would be a 25% reduction from the 2015 to 2017 average pumping level with no projects. And what you'll see here is that because this well is close to the arroyo and it receives recharge, the projects actually have more of an impact to this well and the water levels in this well than just reducing pumping. So the future baseline plus projects is this gray line here, and then if you added on top of the projects a reduction of 10% from that 2015 to 2017 level, you'd have the gold yellow line in that. So when it came to setting the measurable objectives and the minimum thresholds here, what we're really focused on in East Los Posas is a chronic decline in water level. We need to avoid chronic declines in water levels. That would be a significant and unreasonable result under Sigma. And clearly the future baseline is a chronic decline in water level. That doesn't get us there. However, within the 20-year implementation period, we have declines, but after that, when we start focusing on that 2040 to 2070 period, any of these other scenarios would in fact give us relatively stable water levels through the 30-year management period. And so what we've proposed here is a minimum threshold that would be corresponding more or less to the lower water level with that 25% reduction, just the lower modeled water level, and a measurable objective that could be as high as the highest modeled water level. And we've done some additional work to examine how this might impact people, and I will present that in a few slides. I'm going to go through the hydrographs first and then get to the impacts.
Jill, could you repeat for me what was the quantity of water that was in the project of purchasing wastewater from CME? What was the quantity of water?
I think that was about 4,700 acre feet.
47.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is another hydrograph from the Fox Canyon Aquifer, and you're going to see that there's the word shifted next to the title. Last time I was here, I mentioned that there were some wells for which the starting modeled water level didn't match the ending observed water level. So in this case, this is one of those wells, and we've shifted it down so those two match, and we've shifted it to match the observed. Right? That's what you would prefer. That's what you need to do. That's what the actual. That's what's actually happening in the aquifer. This well is more removed from the arroyo. It's over here in the middle of the basin. And here are the same scenarios. And we see with this, again, the future baseline, that's a chronic decline. Even with the projects, there is a long-term decline in water level, modeled water level at that well, whereas for both of the reduction scenarios, it comes to some measure of stability. Here we've got a little bit trickier errand to set the minimum threshold. We didn't want to be overly restrictive in this case if we can manage it so that water levels are stable in the long term. I think the measurable objective is probably a little bit better nailed down for this well, where we've got it roughly at current conditions and we can maintain similar water levels with projects moving into the future. This is now moving to the upper San Pedro, and we're getting increasingly complicated as we have to try to define measurable objectives and minimum thresholds. This is, again, a shifted water level, but the trend nonetheless persists in a downward decline throughout all of the scenarios. Now, I will point out that we are modeling to the historical record here, which the only record we have in this well is a decline. So this is going to be a point of discussion, I'm sure, at the TAG meeting tomorrow. And I think the other thing to keep in mind, and I brought it up last time, and it's going to be something that we have to consider, is that under Sigma, a single point, a single well, a single measurement point is allowed to be, I shouldn't use the term in violation, it would be allowed to have its water level drop below the minimum threshold if we define the basin sustainability in a way that says overall the basin is sustainable, and if we look at all of the wells, we can have one or two that might fall below the minimum threshold for a certain period of time, so long as everything else is stable. So we have to work through how to define that, and that is another local decision. That's something that you have control over in Sigma. Again, the idea with this is to allow some operational flexibility, even though there are long-term declines. And again, I say this having looked at the broader picture of water levels under which the 25% reduction or the 10% reduction or the project scenario manages to stabilize water levels elsewhere in the basin. This is a shallow well close to the arroyo here. And again, we've had stable water levels for the period of time measured. In this well, this is what we're looking at under the future baseline, the 25% reduction, the projects, and then the projects plus a reduction scenarios. So the measurable objective here is again set to the higher modeled water level, and the minimum threshold is set to allow some operational flexibility. And again, to see, even with this 25% reduction scenario, the water levels are 30 feet lower, but they are stable during the 30-year period that they need to be stable, modeled into the future. And this last hydrograph is looking at the Epworth gravels, and this is, I made the mistake last time of starting with this when it's actually one of the more complicated ones. And I'm ending with it this time because I want to emphasize for the Epworth gravels, they really are hydrologically disconnected from the Fox Canyon aquifer and from the projects. And so when we talk about the projects providing water to the arroyo, you actually really see in this hydrograph how the projects don't impact the Epworth gravels at all, because the blue is a wider blue decline and the gray is there. They overlie each other exactly. So the projects haven't impacted water levels in the Epworth gravels, and that fits with our hydrogeologic conceptual model of the basin. So this is anticipated for us. What does impact water levels in the Epworth gravels is a reduction in pumping in the Epworth gravels. And so a 10% reduction in pumping from the 2015 to 2017 levels is shown in purple versus a 15% in gold. You may hit a sweet spot somewhere in that 12% range. We haven't modeled that exactly. It's easy with the model to start really trying to dial in on exactly what you want, but you get the picture from this hydrograph. So I mentioned that we have looked at other impacts, not just these simulated water levels, and this is part of the SGMA process, and it's part of defining what is significant and unreasonable, because if you set a minimum threshold in a way that impacts everyone in the basin, you will certainly hear about it, and you will certainly hear about what their thoughts are on being significant and unreasonable, right? So that's why there is a public process, and that's why it's up to local control. There are a few considerations that go into setting these sustainable management criteria. First is, what is the cause, right? What's causing the conditions in the basin? And in East Las Posas, groundwater production, the answer is that groundwater production at a rate that would cause chronic declines in water levels and significant and unreasonable reduction in groundwater storage would be the cause. So it's production in excess of recharge and production that causes this long-term chronic decline. The second thing to look at is, what are the criteria that we use to define when and where the groundwater conditions cause undesirable results. And so this gets to not only looking at individual wells and defining measurable objectives and minimum thresholds for an individual well, but putting that in the context of the basin as a whole and defining what overall is sustainable for the basin. And you have the flexibility to define the combination of minimum threshold exceedances that would constitute an undesirable result. And then the last is to look at the potential effects of the undesirable result on beneficial uses and users of groundwater. And so that's where this next analysis came in. And one way to think about potential impacts is to look at the number of wells that would be potentially impacted should should the groundwater elevation reach the minimum threshold, what would that do for wells? And you know, in the ideal condition, if you've got a well and you've got your water level above the top of your well screen, you are able to produce water from that well at the rate that you anticipated. As that water level drops below the top and the middle, and certainly below the bottom of that screen, your ability to produce water is impacted. So it's not just if it drops below the bottom of your well, right? The rate and the use of that well is impacted, even if it drops below the top or the middle of the well. So what we did is we looked at the minimum thresholds that we determined from the modeling, and we assigned those minimum thresholds to areas in the basin, and then we looked at the number of wells in each aquifer that were the well screen information that we had to see how many wells would be impacted by these minimum thresholds. And so if we look at the shallow aquifer first, we had 8 total wells in the shallow aquifer. 50% of them had a minimum threshold below the, above the top of the screen. So that's good for those 4 wells, but there are 4 that don't. Those same 4 wells had a minimum threshold above the middle of the screen. And when we got to the bottom, there were 7 wells that had it above the bottom of the screen. Now, the real concern here is with impacts to production, and I will say that all of the wells in the shallow aquifer are actually monitoring wells. So we can still measure the water level in 7 of the 8 existing monitoring wells in the shallow aquifer. It's not a production concern, but we would lose 1 of those. So the next step, and I'm going to say this for each of these, the next step is actually, I haven't had a chance to go back and look at exactly which well that is and where it is and what the potential impacts of how close is it to the minimum threshold. Can we get that one back in the fold, so to speak? So we did this for each of the aquifers. If we look at the Epworth, we had 8 total wells again that we had known screen intervals. I should emphasize this is where we have known screen information. There certainly could be plenty of other wells out there, but we don't have the screen information to do the analysis. 6 of them had water levels that were above the minimum threshold, I should say, was above the top of the screen, so they would not be impacted at all. 8 of the 8 were above the middle of the screen, and then, of course, 8 of the 8 were also above the bottom. And we moved to the Upper San Pedro, 17 wells that we looked at, just straight across the board. I'm sorry, 18 that we looked at, 17 of them were above the top of the screen for the minimum threshold. When we moved to the Fox, we had 81 total wells. These are not I should emphasize, these are not wells that are screened only in the Fox or only in the Upper San Pedro. They have screen intervals that cross these aquifers. 69 of those wells would have a minimum threshold water level that is above the top of the screen and would not be impacted. 78 are above the middle, and 79 are above the bottom. I will say for these 3 wells or this one, those are agricultural wells. So those are production wells. And then we did the same for the Grimes, and we've got 12, 18, and 20. So we have some more work to do with this analysis. This would be part of the consideration of what is significant and unreasonable. So we're moving forward, looking at the details of picking out these specific wells that might be impacted by this. We can bring that back for your review in January. We also have to talk to the TAG about this. This will come up tomorrow in our discussions with them. And to summarize, I think the discussion on the East Los Posas management area, right now the modeling doesn't suggest the need for radical action day one. There is certainly, if you continued at the 2015 to 2017 production levels and there is no replenishment and surface water flows in the Arroyo decline, there will be chronic declines in water levels. But there's no suggestion that it has to be changed radically tomorrow. There's a plan. We have 20 years to get there. And we're looking in this basin clearly to prevent the chronic declines in water levels. And it looks like we have ways, the models suggest that there are multiple ways to get there, that we can use projects, we can use reductions. There are multiple tools, multiple paths to sustainability. I think that is where I will wrap up with East Las Posas, and now we'll move into setting the minimum thresholds and measurable objectives for Oxnard, Pleasant Valley, and West Las Posas. And this is new, but some of it I think will start to look familiar. Heard a lot today about seawater intrusion. So just as in the East Las Posas Basin, we certainly have to be concerned with chronic declines in groundwater elevations in these other basins. We have two concerns here. One is the chronic declines, which impact storage and the rest of it. The other is seawater intrusion. And so just as in East Las Posas, there are 4 existing model runs. There are very similar 4 existing model runs for the Oxnard, Pleasant Valley, and West Las Posas areas. So we've got that future baseline. It's the same set of conditions. It incorporates the DWR climate change. It incorporates the 2015 to 2017 pumping values, and it incorporates existing planned projects that have already gone through all of the approval processes and have the funding and all of the rest of that, things that are coming online in the near future. The second run is that future baseline plus the projects that went through the board process. And then the third and fourth are looking at the future baseline with some reduction in production and projects. The third is a 20% cut to production off the 2015 to 2017 rate for Oxnard, Pleasant Valley, and West Las Posas across all aquifers, both aquifer systems. The fourth run is actually a 35% reduction in Oxnard and keeping that 20% reduction in Pleasant Valley and West Las Posas. And you'll see why we get to that in a minute. Again, I'm going to talk a little bit about the projects so you have an understanding when we talk about these runs and how the projects impact seawater intrusion and water level declines. You understand where the projects are and what they're delivering. The projects as modeled include fallowing near the pumping trough, so fallowing of land near the pumping trough that would reduce pumping in the upper aquifer system by 1,800 acre-feet per year and in the lower aquifer system by about 600 acre-feet per year. Although, and this is in Pleasant Valley, I should say, and I should also note that the total simulated pumping reduction was less than those plan values because of conflicts with contracted surface water deliveries. And if you have detailed questions about that, I'm going to pass those to Peter because he has been in the weeds on that much more so than I have. But I will pause here to say, again, the projects as modeled are not a requirement to adopt them, and nor are they specific to any given landowner's site. So we had to incorporate them, we had to put them somewhere in the model, but this is not telling any individual that this specific parcel will be fallowed. In Oxnard, we have water deliveries of 4,600 acre-feet per year near Wainimi Road to help with the seawater intrusion problem, along with about a 500 acre-feet per year reduction of production through fallowing, and then 4,500 acre-feet per year. This was a great setup through the GREAT program expansion. So we heard a lot about that earlier today. And then lastly, but certainly not least, in West Las Posas, the projects include a purchase of about 1,800 acre-feet per year of in-lieu groundwater extraction for the lower aquifer system. So this is the end result, and there's a lot going on in this graph. So let me try to explain it as simply as I can, but please ask questions about this because this really summarizes where we've gotten to with the modeling efforts to date. So if we start over on the left, we've got our 4 different model scenarios that I talked about. The future baseline, baseline plus projects. This is the 20% reduction across all basins. This is the 35% reduction in Oxnard plus the 20 in PV and West Las Posas. Each of these bars is looking now at the total flux at the coastline in the model from seawater.
Say that again, the total what?
Flux, how much water's coming in at the coastline. There are 2 ways we can look at this. One is out at the model domain boundary. We're looking here at the coastline, the modeled coastline. And if we have a 0 point here, this is the modeled flux, the modeled coastal flux in acre feet per year. Positive is a landward flux. That's flow coming into the model from the ocean. Negative is a seaward flux. That's going out of the model towards the ocean. So under the future baseline scenario, if we look at the semi-perched aquifer in blue, the upper aquifer system in red, and the lower aquifer system in green, it's all coming in to the model domain. It's seawater intrusion into the model domain. When we get to the future baseline plus projects, now we've impacted that semi-perched aquifer, so there's a slight seaward flux, there's a slight flow out towards the ocean, and a reduction in the landward flux, but still a landward flux in both of these aquifer systems. When we get to the reduction, the 20% reduction in pumping, plus the projects, now we see the impacts again, a larger seaward flux in the semi-perched, almost at 0 in the upper aquifer system, still a landward flux in the lower. And lastly, when we get to that 35% reduction in Oxnard, 20 in PV and West Las Posas, now we've got seaward fluxes in the semi-perched and the lower, and the upper, so semi-perched and the upper system, both are going out towards the ocean. That's fresh water going out of the system towards the ocean, and still a landward flux in the lower aquifer system. Now, if you add all of these up, it's a net 0, but that's not really how we're managing the system under Sigma, nor should we be managing it that way, because you would still be allowing seawater intrusion in the lower, and meanwhile you've got fresh water flowing offshore in the upper. So when we look at this, and we're looking now just at looking at projects with uniform reductions in pumping across all of the aquifer systems, we get a net 0 flux, but that allows for seawater intrusion in the lower, and you're losing water in the upper. So we have persistent seawater intrusion in the lower aquifer system. And what this is really telling us is that we need management action to start to regulate pumping between the aquifer systems. And so we are going to go ahead and model that, although that action has not been developed yet, so that we can give you an idea of what the quantities of water would look like and the production in the different systems would look like to get us to 0 in all of those aquifer systems. So that's the next step, and that will impact certainly our setting of the measurable objectives and the minimum thresholds. But I'm going to take you through kind of the logic of where we're going with setting those for Oxnard to begin with, just so you see where we're going, although I will caution that the absolute values may change in some of these moving forward into when we come back in January. So this is a well in the Fox Canyon Aquifer. It's down here in the southern part of Oxnard. This was the future baseline scenario in the light blue. I apologize, the color, we swapped the colors here. The gray is with the projects. The gold is the 20% reduction across all of the basins in all aquifers. And the blue is that 35% reduction in Oxnard with 20% reduction elsewhere. And the minimum threshold here, in fact, as we saw from that last graph, may not in fact be protective of the lower aquifer system because we set it here, but we still have seawater intrusion coming into the lower aquifer system. So this is one that was set below sea level that may need to come up with additional model runs. The measurable objective, however, is it also may change, but I think we're looking again to say that there may be times that the water levels exceed the measurable objective. And that would be fine, that would be great. The basin would be in really good shape to weather whatever drought comes up.
Exceedingly rare.
Exceedingly rare. And exceedingly rare, yes. I will leave that statement not to me to make, but there could be times where it exceeds the measurable objective. You do, again, want to manage toward that measurable objective so you have the ability to weather those droughts as they come. In contrast here, when we look at the Oxnard aquifer near the coast and a minimum threshold and a measurable objective, we may be fairly close with these as we come to the last model run where we did have flux out to the ocean, and so there may be some adjustments that could suggest that the minimum threshold could decline or go down a little bit from here. We haven't done that yet, but I think these are where we're heading, so that in this 30-year period, right, we've got relatively stable, or depending on our climate conditions that we've modeled, increasing water levels, and we have the ability to weather a longer-term drought. Now, when I get to Pleasant Valley and West Las Posas, I have not actually set measurable objectives or minimum thresholds because there are some added complications in these basins. If we look back at this general pattern of water level with recharge, I mean, most of this is driven by United's recharge and their ability to recharge the basin in a given water year. If you look at that general pattern, there's a similar pattern that can be observed. This is now in the Pleasant Valley Basin in the Fox Canyon Aquifer. Water levels are not exactly the same, but the patterns are similar. It's being impacted by United's ability to provide water. And this is this well at the western end of Pleasant Valley. We are in the process of looking at correlating and actually conducting the correlations between water level elevation in the wells throughout Pleasant Valley and West Las Posas and seawater flux. We've looked at it, and this is modeled water level, simulated elevation, and simulated flux. And at the coastline, as you would expect, it's a very good correlation. That's how the model is actually calculating the flux in, using those water levels. But as you move farther from the coastline, there are impacts from other, from other hydrologic controls on water level, right? It's not, so as you move to the east, it's not as simple a relationship between seawater flux in and water level. In this particular well, there is a relationship. If we look at another well, that doesn't look the same. Now, this well is impacted, or I shouldn't say impacted, the water levels in this well result from the North Pleasant Valley Desalter project. And that, again, I will turn to Peter for the specifics on it, but that's a limited time project, and there are water level triggers as part of that project that would require that project to stop producing water. So in this well, this is not, the main influence here is not seawater intrusion. This is that Pleasant Valley Desalter project. And when it shuts down in 2045 or so, you see a long-term recovery in water levels in that well. So we haven't set the measurable objectives and minimum thresholds. We're in the process of working these out. We're in the process, for Pleasant Valley, I should say, and for West Las Posas, and you'll see that in the next slide. We will certainly be discussing these with TAG. We will also be running additional model scenarios to look at different ways to achieve sustainability in these basins. And here is another example of where additional model scenarios may prove instructive if we look in now the West Las Posas management area in the Fox Canyon Aquifer system. We've got, once we start getting to 20% reductions, during that time period where we need to be managing to a measurable objective, we actually have, because of climate conditions modeled in this particular set of model runs, we have a long-term increase in that. So we need to look at impacts to that well, whereas again, as we move west in the Fox Canyon Aquifer, we're starting to see a little bit more of that familiar pattern of the impact of United's operations on water levels. So we're in the process of working through these. We've gotten a lot more done since the last time I was here, but there's still more to do. And so with that, when we get to the next steps, I will say we certainly need to finish the model runs, and I think those are moving at quite a rapid pace now, and so we're getting close. I think we've got at least 2 more scenarios that we would like to see done, including one specifically that would model differential pumping in the upper and lower aquifer system to start to address that balance of the fresh water going out versus the seawater coming in the different aquifer systems. We still need to look at a model run just like we did in East Las Posas, where we don't have any projects. So what would the reductions be in the absence of projects? What would that look like to get to sustainability? But that one is in the works. And so I think we are getting close. And as Kim said, we'll have a much better idea for you in January. But there is a light on the modeling. Of course, once the light comes with the end of actually doing the modeling, there's a lot of work to analyze the data and to turn those into sustainable management criteria. The sustainable management criteria will be revisited, and I have here that it's really for West Las Posas and PV, but nothing's set in stone yet, and I would remind you that nothing is even set in stone once the GSP goes in. This is our first good estimate using good tools, using the best available science, but there are 5-year updates. There are other analyses that need to be done. Additional data will be gathered, and so these can be adjusted moving into the future. But this is what we have to go on now. So we'll be revisiting the minimum thresholds and measurable objectives. There will certainly be TAG review of those minimum thresholds and measurable objectives, looking at the technical work to go into those. And we're anticipating coming back to you for board approval at the end of January on minimum thresholds and measurable objectives. Once that happens, and actually concurrently as the model runs end, we're incorporating those model results as we get them into the GSP, and we're incorporating the sustainable management criteria as we get those. And then I didn't say it in that uppermost bullet point, but there are some other modeling details to work through as well, including the sensitivity analysis for East Las Posas and the peer review. I think I will end with that. That's all I have prepared.
Jill, I think I understand well enough how you have settled on minimum thresholds and what you're looking at to evaluate that. What I understand less well is the elements that you're reviewing to determine what those measurable objectives should be.
Yeah.
Because when I look at some of those hydrographs, I can see how a small shift in both of those lines would make a big difference in assessing whether what the future performance is going to look like, whether it's going to satisfy, if in the Oxnard Aquifer, if the measurable objective was down at 20 and the minimum threshold was at 0, well, then you'd need less corrective action over the course of the next 50 years in order to stay, to be compliant with the plan. But I guess what I don't understand is why that measurable objective is there as opposed to some different number.
Yeah. So let me start with the idea of the corrective action. In the Oxnard Aquifer, in the Oxnard Basin, particularly close to the coast, right, what we're really focusing on is seawater intrusion, and that is very much governed by the minimum threshold and the need for water levels to stay above that minimum threshold over a long-term period to have a net zero seawater intrusion over that period. So that's going to be the driving force for the corrective action in the first 20 years.
I understand where the minimum threshold is going. It's the measurable objective part that I don't quite get.
No, I understand that, and I just wanted to separate out the idea of corrective action with the measurable objective. You have a longer time to get to that measurable objective, and there's no, like I said, there's no punishment or there's no requirement that you meet it. DWR doesn't judge the basin based on whether or not the water levels are at that measurable objective. The real goal with the measurable objective is to provide the flexibility to use water when you need it during a drought. And so what we looked at when we were coming up with these, and I'm sure, again, this will be a discussion at the TAG meeting tomorrow, was actually that the amount of time during the 30-year period after the implementation period, the amount of time that the water levels were above a certain threshold, and that threshold was actually the measurable objective. And so what we proposed right now, and this is for local control, and as I said, it's not a tablet, it's not chipped in stone, is that you would want your water levels to be above your measurable objective or potentially above your measurable objective 30% of the time. And that's what we're looking at for this. Now that's a concept that we will run through TAG. We haven't had the opportunity to run that through TAG yet. That'll be a point of discussion. But it's a threshold that should be set so that you have the reasonable expectation of being able to use groundwater and not hit that minimum threshold and go into major corrective action at the point that you start to see seawater intrusion again in the future.
Can I ask this question? It's related. So let's say theoretically, in this example here, the minimum threshold, by the way, it looks like it's 5. I'm just going to say it's probably 4, just looking at the graph, right? Well, let's say it's 4, right? And if we said the measurable objective was 5, just 1 acre-foot above that, we would have very little flexibility in that situation because we hit our measurable objective. So if we don't have enough of a gap between the minimum threshold and the measurable objective, then you don't have very much flexibility. You're going to be, we're where we're supposed to be, and then almost immediately you're going, now we got to take corrective action.
That's right. Yeah.
And so you want to set it high enough that you don't have to immediately be throwing yourself back into corrective action.
That's right. But what high enough is up to you. Yeah.
But if you don't build some of that in there, then you don't have the ability to flex your groundwater supply.
That's right.
And then you're going to be constrained in terms of corrective action coming much more rapidly. Right? If you're not willing to almost save it up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
lastly, in any of the modeling that's being done, and maybe it's part of the projects, particularly along the coastline, has there been any modeling done with respect to moving pumping away from the coastline?
I'm going to let Peter answer this because he is far more aware of the specifics of the modeling.
Hi, Director West. We didn't move pumping, but the fallowing and the water deliveries were meant to retire wells near the coast, or not, so they didn't have to pump. So water was delivered to the areas near the coast to stop the pumping there, and which would, in essence, shift the production landward. But with what we were able to do so far, the 4,600 and the acre feet of deliveries from the GREAT program and 500 of fallowing weren't enough there wasn't enough pumping, I guess, in the lower aquifer close to the coast to get us to zero flux, zero seawater intrusion in the lower. So we're still working on that.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board? Thank you, Joe. Don't go far, but the information is very helpful. Brian, did you have a question?
Can I go back to one of your, it's a ways back. Maybe not that far back. I just wanted, Brian Bondi, on behalf of Kaigas, Susan couldn't be here, but we've been texting, and she asked me to make a comment about this discussion about screen intervals as a basis for setting thresholds in the Las Posas Basin. First, I want to thank DUDEC for doing this analysis. I actually was one of the people that thought it would be a good exercise. But I'm concerned with the interpretation of what makes sense. What you were presented with is an implicit assumption that it would be okay to pump down into the screen interval. Wells aren't designed that way. You design a well with the pump above the screen. In this case, these are confined aquifers. You would have a larger upper section pump chamber, then you'd have your screen below that. So if the threshold is set to allow water levels to pump down into the screen, well, that could never happen because you can't pump below the pump. Pump's above the screen. So really what I think we need to be looking at in this analysis is some level above the screen. You have the pump. Then you need to have a column of water that gets drawn down when you're pumping. So if you have a 1,000 gallon per minute well, and the well can yield 10 gallons per minute of water for every foot of drawdown, you need 100 feet of water above the pump, which is 10 or 20 feet above the screen. So I'm sure we'll have more discussion about this in TAG, but for the Fox Canyon and Grimes Canyon, you're going to be impacting production way before you get to the screen. That's the point. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Any other questions or comments? Did you want to respond, Peter?
Yeah, that's a good point. We do not have information about the depth at which the pumps are set, but certainly we can, discuss this tomorrow and, make some adjustments so that we come up with a factor to set it higher than, some distance above the top of the screen. And we don't have information on the screen intervals for all the wells either.
They're all the same, yeah. All right. Questions or comments from the public?
Jürgen Gramko again. In the modeling, you were showing Fox Canyon, semi-perched, Oxnard, and then Fox Canyon. And then you were giving us reductions by basin, that is to say Pleasant Valley or Oxnard. Whatever happened to the concept, and this was kicked around early, Steve Bachman brought it back to an OPV meeting almost 2 years ago, where TAG was thinking about allocations or thresholds by aquifer. Because what what this is saying is that if you reduce the Oxnard Basin by 35%, you've got water running offshore now in the lower the upper aquifer, and you haven't done much for the lower. Yet, we're cutting back substantially more than is necessary, and what's happening is water's going offshore.
Yeah, I'm sorry if that wasn't clear earlier, but that is where we got to. So the next steps are to look at differential cutbacks by aquifer system, so that we've cut back too much in the Oxnard and the Magoo, and potentially not enough in the Fox and the Grimes. The direction was to do uniform to start with.
Anyone else? The recommendations include providing direction with respect to minimum thresholds and measurable objectives, and I like the approach that gives us maximum flexibility, as long as as long as we're not setting ourselves up for failure with measurable objectives that are so high that we're never likely to achieve them, or at least not in any consistent way. Anyone else?
Or so low that we don't have any flexibility. So,
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
yeah, I agree with you. I mean, that's the art here.
Right.
In my own sense, I felt good about sort of the approach they were taking, the logic that they had in their head. I don't have any modifications in terms of where they're going from my side.
It seems to me, though, that we heard just from one TAG member that they're going to have to chew this over a bit, and
Sure.
There's a lot to look at. So I'm looking forward to hearing that.
So, Chair West Board, just on the measurable objectives, that's just an operating goal. It's not the threshold on which we'll be
Graded.
based on terms of whether we're sustainably managing the basin. And there will be 2 TAG meetings. There's 2 regularly scheduled TAG meetings before the next board meeting. So hopefully we'll have a lot more opportunity for the TAG input into this discussion.
Anything? Do you need anything further from us? No. All right, let's move on then to item number 7.
Right. Chair West, board members, Arnie Anselm, staff to the GMA. This item is a proposed amendment to agency ordinance code to require automated monthly reporting of extractions from agricultural groundwater extraction facilities. The second reading of this item. So currently, active agricultural wells are required to have calibrated meters for reporting of extractions. Reporting is done in January and July, and the data is used to calculate our pump fees and surcharges if they apply. The data is also used in our groundwater simulation models to calculate the sustainable yield. Your board adopted an advanced metering infrastructure ordinance this year that required AMI on active agricultural wells by December 31st of this year. That ordinance did not change the reporting requirements. Additional data is available to the GMA through the AMI grant program. Anybody who's applied for the grant agreed to share their monthly extraction data with us, but that only applies to those that got AMI through the grant. Monthly extraction reporting has value to the GMA. This was recommended by the Operations Committee. With monthly data, we'll be able to report on the DWR's water year, which is October to September. The sustainability modeling requires monthly extractions extraction input, we don't have that currently, so it's been extrapolated from the semi-annual reports, and will also allow us to improve our allocation tracking. So the ordinance before you today requires automated or computer-generated report of groundwater extractions on a monthly basis. This can be accomplished through AMI data management system, providing the data to the GMA, and that's the web portal, not the actual unit in the field, but it uploads its data to the web. That can give us the data. The data we're requesting is a meter reading, and I'm going to point out that's distinct from the first reading that happened October. The total extractions for each extraction facility in acre feet for the preceding month. The first report will be due in February and will include the total extractions for the month of January. This does not change the penalties for non-reporting, and as I mentioned, all AMI installed under the grant will be in compliance. Semi-annual groundwater extraction statements are still required in January and July of each year. It has more information than we're requesting for the monthly statements. And also the payments for pump fees are still required with the semi-annual extractions reports or statements. The reporting requirement has slightly changed to facilitate the transition to land-based allocation system. So it now includes parcel numbers. Crop type will still be reported for IAI efficiency allocation. Alternative reporting is available under the draft ordinance before you. It's allowed if it's highly impracticable for automated reporting and would require essentially manually monthly reporting. GMA will have some data management needs to handle this data. We are creating a temporary data storage to handle the new data, designing a template. We're working with Ranch System and other AMI vendors so we can import this data seamlessly. I'm hearing it's very straightforward, no problem, but we still have to get through that. So the recommended actions for this item are to receive this presentation, conduct a public hearing, find the ordinance categorically exempt under CEQA, and conduct the second reading in title only of the preferred ordinance, and recommendation is to adopt the ordinance.
Thank you. Any questions?
No,
Comments?
I have a comment, and there's a slight change in this ordinance from what we approved in October, and I do approve of that change. It makes it more specific.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the board? Which one, I guess, will convene the public hearing with respect to the ordinance to amend the reporting requirements. Any questions or comments from the public? Come forward, please.
Hi.
Hello.
My name is Lori, and I manage a mutual water company for about 500 acres. So we have 20 parcels, and they have all different owners. So I guess my question is, you mentioned parcel numbers. That makes me nervous because we have 2 wells to keep track of the metering and whatnot. It just gets really complex, especially monthly reporting. And my other concern is the monthly reporting at any point going to be used to penalize us?
First, let me answer the first part with respect to the individual parcels. You know, one of the priorities of the board, particularly as we discuss allocation systems, is to eventually move away from the wellhead-based allocation system to a land-based allocation system, and we can't do that without parcel data. So that's part and parcel, no pun intended, of the reason for that requirement, and I'll let Arnie deal with the rest.
I understand that, but that would be a big thing to do starting in January for us. So.
Understood.
So the information in monthly reporting, it does not include the parcel data. Okay. That's only in the semi-annual extraction statements.
I'm good with that.
And same with any payments pump fees and potential surcharges are on the semi-annual statements.
Okay, great. That answers my question.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. To conclude the public hearing and move on, I guess we need a motion to find the ordinance categorically exempt under Water Code 10-728.6 from CEQA.
So moved.
All at once?
I guess we can do that all at once, yeah. And included in the motion to conduct a second reading of the ordinance in title only and waive further reading and to adopt the ordinance.
So moved.
Second.
I guess we need a roll call for that.
Chair West,
Yes.
Director Bennett,
Yes.
Director Aranio,
Yes.
Director Craven,
Yes.
Director Borchard.
Yes.
I guess get with that, Kayla, you need to read the title.
Proposed amendment to Agency Ordinance Code to require automated monthly reporting of extractions from agricultural groundwater extraction facilities.
Thank you. At this point, the board's going to adjourn into a closed session. We'll reemerge at some point, hopefully sooner rather than later. Right,
Can we
Andy?
receive and file the executive officer's report
Oh.
now?
We can do that now, yes. Is it
So moved.
second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. Yeah, no. Hasn't given us up.
Nobody stayed around.
No, all right, it is 5:08. We are returned from closed session. Do we have to, I guess we have to announce that we gave staff instructions to proceed with public record requests to,
I don't know that we actually do.
do we? We do? Okay. We gave staff instructions to proceed with public records requests to Pleasant Valley and Cayugas in order to obtain some of the information needed. What's that?
United as well.
And United. Just some of the information needed to work on the Cayugas Creek allocation credit issue. Other than that, no action was taken that needs to be reported out of closed session.
Any other agencies that
Right, any other agencies that were involved. We're adjourned.